Test 1, 2. Ready, Jim? All right, everybody. Well, welcome to the 2016 National Hurricane Conference Amateur Radio Workshop. I'm Rob Macedo. My amateur radio call is KD1CY. I'm the Director of Operations for the VoIP Hurricane Net, which we'll talk about later today. I'm also the Regional Skywarn Coordinator for the National Weather Service office in Taunton, Massachusetts. I'm a volunteer there. I've been doing that for about 20 years. So welcome to everybody. I know your faces. We've been to Orlando a number of times. A couple of logistical things. If anything happens where we have to leave, there's the 2 exit doors behind you. We have a great program lined up. We tried to keep with the themes that are very important, but try to present some new and interesting material to kind of continue to keep the main points in front of us that we need to do, but also give you kind of new ways to think about what we do, because things continue to change even in our amateur radio environment, and there's just all of our traditional roles and new roles that I think amateur radio brings to the table. So to kick it off here, we have a special guest who's been with us for the last several workshops. It's Dr. Rick Knabb from the National Hurricane Center. He's the director of the National Hurricane Center, a very strong advocate for amateur radio, and he's here today to speak with us on where we fit in and the importance of our role. Rick?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to see the room pretty full here, and looking forward to the interaction with the folks watching on video. This is a really, really important conference, and this is a very important interaction. The most important thing I can do in talking with you today is to say thank you. Thank you, thank you for what you do. There are so many benefits to what amateur radio has done for the Hurricane Center and for our forecasting, for public safety, for our historical record over the years, and we could not do it without all of you. And I would characterize what the benefits are into 3 major categories. One is obviously real-time information that you all provide to us via a technology that is, in my view, most likely to continue operating when all the other fancy new technologies fail. And that's extremely important to us at the Hurricane Center, because we as forecasters need observations. We need to know what's going on in the affected or potentially affected areas. And as you have perhaps seen in past years looking at our advisories, we often include the observations that we get through amateur radio transmissions to WX4NHC at the Hurricane Center that are then brought directly out to the hurricane forecaster, and that gets directly included in our advisories, and it's also part of our thinking, because the more we know about what's actually happening in affected areas, the better we can get off to a good start on the forecast. Every good forecast starts with proverbially looking out the window, all right? And you are our window to many places where we can't directly see. And that's just one benefit of what you do for us. Another big benefit is that the data that we collect, the information that you provide, not just the meteorological values, but the information about what the impacts have been, are so important for us to document for the historical record what has happened in a particular tropical cyclone event, not just to document the impacts, but to verify our forecasts. And you may be aware that we are moving very aggressively to implement new products and new warnings and new services from the Hurricane Center, especially when it has to do with water-related impacts. You know, this year we're going operational with a new storm surge, a potential storm surge flooding map that we're going to issue with every new advisory when there's a threat to the U.S. that's going to show the areas that could flood due to storm surge, and we're never going to have a complete understanding of how well those products and that information have performed unless we have real-time information about when the flooding had been occurring during an event. And we can get that kind of information from you all as well. And also, just to be able to document what the tropical cyclone did. How strong was it? How large was it? Where exactly did it come ashore? And I know I've shared this story before, but Julio, I'm gonna guess that not everybody who's heard this story before is in this room, and perhaps people who are here today have never heard me tell this story before. But just to give you an idea of how valuable the data you collect can be for getting the historical record of hurricanes right. And why is that important? We have to get the historical record right so that climate studies can be accurate, so that individual countries and communities can know what has happened in the past. That's a very good education tool. But it's also important to know what happened so we can verify our forecast. You can't know how good your forecasting is unless you can compare it to what actually happened. But here's a real world example that I dealt with firsthand where your data and information came into play. Okay? This was 2005, and I'm not going to talk here about the big US landfalls in 2005 where your data was very valuable, but there was an Eastern Pacific hurricane in May of 2005, very early season hurricane, named Adrian, and it formed off the coast of Central America. And I was in my first year as a hurricane specialist at the Hurricane Center that year. I'd been the science and operations officer for a few years before that, but this is my first year as a hurricane specialist. And so Adrian was the first hurricane for which I wrote advisories as a hurricane specialist. And because I was new to the group, I drew the first straw in documenting and writing the Hurricane Center report on what the first cyclone in the Eastern Pacific was going to do that year. Because my colleagues thought, well, we'll give him the first early season East Pacific storm to write a report on, and that'll be nice and easy for him. Well, that system threw us multiple curveballs. And as it was approaching Central America, because usually the Eastern Pacific systems, they form south of Mexico and they go off into the Eastern Pacific, and most of them don't affect land. But this one had other ideas, and it came northward into Central America, approaching Guatemala and El Salvador and Nicaragua and Honduras and that whole area. And as it became a hurricane, we sent the aircraft out there, we knew it was a hurricane, and then it was headed for Central America. And as it was approaching land, it started to lose some of its definition, and overnight, when we didn't have visible satellite imagery and we were having trouble with the infrared imagery, seeing what was really going on in the inside of the system, it started to look like it was falling apart, or at least weakening. And overnight, whatever it was came ashore, or so we thought. And our advisories in real time said that it had made landfall as a hurricane in El Salvador. And then the next morning, we see this little swirl sitting offshore. What is that? Well, that's interesting. The mountainous terrain must have created this interesting spin. Oh, I don't know what that is. The thing's already gone ashore. The more that circulation sat offshore and eventually went inland, we thought, do we really even know if the center of this hurricane went ashore? And we started going to look for data, because it's relatively important for the historical record to know if it went ashore as a hurricane or if what was left of it stayed offshore. And so we went to Julio and John, WX4NHC, and the call went out. We needed data from El Salvador to try to confirm if this system came ashore. And I don't know how many different hops and how many different people had to be involved in getting this information, but as it turns out, there was a sailboat in a port in El Salvador, and we eventually got the data, and this is into the stage after the event where I'm having to write the report on this easy to document Eastern Pacific tropical cyclone. And we're getting this data in, and then I sat down and analyzed it, and that data made it pretty clear that the circulation never came ashore in El Salvador, and that little swirl we saw sitting offshore was what was left of the hurricane that had its top ripped off, and that was what was left of it, and it went limping along, not even in El Salvador. It went farther south, it went inland as a tropical depression, or what was left of one. So, based on your data, I undid the operational designation and changed the historical record to say, no, it wasn't a hurricane making landfall in El Salvador. It was a tropical depression making landfall much farther south in another country altogether. Now, my colleagues, the hurricane specialists, are you serious? You're telling me that we incorrectly stated in our public advisories that a hurricane made landfall here, and you're going to say, no, actually it was a tropical depression making landfall there. Are you nuts? But I showed them the data. And as difficult as that scenario was to digest, it highlighted, number one, how difficult it is to figure out what's going on when you don't have enough data. There wasn't radar down there. It was overnight. We didn't have visible satellite imagery. But we have official responsibility at the Hurricane Center to be stewards of the historical record. And without the data that we were obtained from you all, we would have gotten the historical record wrong. And to this day, we'd be incorrectly saying that a hurricane made landfall in that country. And that's just one example. There are many others. That's an extreme example of undoing what we did operationally, but that's the way it really was. And that's the real impact of data that we get from you. And of course, if we get such data in real time, it can change some very important decisions and information that we convey in our advisories. As a hurricane specialist, I was given lots of information about what winds and what flooding were occurring in certain areas, either directly impacted or indirectly impacted by tropical cyclones in the past. And our hurricane forecasters place a tremendously high value on the information that we get from you. But that's not all. I think there's a third area in which we can all continue to work together and maybe enhance how we work together. And as I see some of the young folks here today, and I'm so glad to see them here, outreach and education is something that I think we can all partner in doing more and more together. You know, we're trying to make our forecasts more and more accurate as the years go by. We're introducing these new products and warnings to convey this is where the winds could occur, this is where the storm surge could occur. We're hoping that leads to better evacuation decision-making by emergency managers to keep people alive as a hurricane comes ashore, and to help our media partners on television convey things more clearly. But since you all have that volunteer mindset, that understanding that what you are doing has such importance that you're willing to spend your own time on it, and that you know that the information that you're providing can not only be useful, but it can be life-saving. That I would bet that you would be the kind of people that could help us as we try to ramp up and do an even better job of doing outreach and education to the public so that people take steps to get ready for the next hurricane way in advance. Because all the best forecast data, warnings, evacuation instructions, excellent coverage by media, if all of that is perfect, it still doesn't result in an outcome that we need unless people have taken steps well in advance so that they know what they're going to do when the hurricane warning is issued, when the evacuation instruction is issued, when that piece of data comes in that says, wow, it's already flooding in this area. We might get data from you that says that causes us to up our storm surge forecast numbers. You know, when all of that happens, the outcome isn't necessarily going to be any better if people don't know if they even live in an evacuation zone and don't have an evacuation plan so they know what to do when they're told to evacuate. If people don't get the right kinds of insurance, including flood insurance, far in advance, it's going to be a lot harder for them to come back after the hurricane hits. If people don't buy the supplies that they need way in advance, it's going to be a lot more difficult and unpleasant to get through the storm and the potentially nasty and lengthy aftermath. And if people don't do whatever they can to strengthen their home, they're more prone to get damage and have a harder time getting back. You know, those are the real world things that hurricanes do that forecasts don't fix. They help, but they don't get the entire hurricane problem taken care of. And I hope that as you engage with one another, as you engage with other parts of the hurricane enterprise, whether it's emergency managers, media, the public, that you take every possible opportunity as tremendous ambassadors for what we are trying to do in the Weather Service and the Hurricane Center, and are so like-minded with us, that you would encourage people way in advance to take those simple steps. And when, you know how the media says, Rick, in 10 seconds, can you tell me what people need to do to get ready for hurricane season? When I've got that 10 seconds, I say evacuation, supplies, insurance, strengthen your home. And if we just keep saying those things over and over, and then if they ask, you know, what does that really mean? Well, find out if you live in an evacuation zone. Go shopping, get supplies. That's so important to get through the storm and the aftermath. Go visit your insurance agent. Make sure you have all the insurance you need. And I know, exciting insurance, right? But how many times do we talk to people, maybe you know some, who when impacted by a hurricane, they say, I've lost everything. I never thought it would be this bad. I didn't have enough insurance. I didn't have flood insurance. And that can financially devastate a family or a business. And then there are so many things that we can do to make our homes just a little bit stronger, a little bit safer, that don't cost as much, aren't as hard to do as many people think. So I just keep saying it over and over again. Evacuation, supplies, insurance, strengthen your home. In fact, we've gotten so used to talking about those 4 things that that's going to be the main 4 themes that we talk about this May on our Hurricane Awareness Tour. How many of you live along or near the Gulf Coast of the U.S. or Florida? Okay, and how many of you are more East Coast of the U.S.? Okay. Both groups were coming to your town, or close to it. This year, we're doing our Hurricane Awareness Tour on the Gulf Coast in May. And anyone, and even if you're East Coast, come on down anyway. If you want to make a road trip, come on down. There's no reason why you all can't participate actively. And here's where I think there's mutual benefit to doing that. This May, in middle of May, we're going to take an entire week, and it's going to be National Hurricane Preparedness Week, the week of May 15th. And we're going to go Monday through Friday, city to city along the Gulf Coast. We're going to do San Antonio, because the inland flood threat, the inland impacts, the winds, the tornadoes, that's a real thing we got to get across. We're going to start in San Antonio on that Monday, then we're going to do Houston, well, Galveston actually, and we're going to do Mobile, Alabama, then we're going to go, I'm sorry, I skipped over New Orleans. So it's San Antonio, Houston, New Orleans, Mobile, and then we're going to go down to the Naples, Fort Myers, Florida area. And we're going to bring 2 planes. We're going to bring the Air Force C-130 and the NOAA P-3, both Hurricane Hunter planes that we use that fly into the hurricane. And the public is going to come out, school kids are going to come out, the media is going to be there, emergency managers are going to be there. And I would like to do everything possible to make you guys famous with all the media coverage that'll be there. And come and join us and be a part of it. And even if you're not physically there, we're working with partners like FLASH, the Federal Alliance for Safe Homes, that does a lot of work in this country to get families and individuals disaster safe. And they're going to be doing this national campaign you'll hear about more in the general session tomorrow. You can help us out with that no matter where you live. That's going to be an event that will take place throughout the country during Hurricane Preparedness Week. But then East Coast, we go back to East Coast next year. And we did that last year, so it alternates. Because many of you in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic have been hit a lot more frequently and more recently than Florida has. So one of these days, Florida is going to get hit by hurricanes like you hurricane-savvy people up in the Northeast do. You know, it's been reversed for a while now. We're going to do the East Coast next year. And so that week, the Hurricane Preparedness Week and the Hurricane Awareness Tour is a really good way to engage with the public, get some media coverage. The airplanes provide the bait for the media partners to show up and the kids show up. And I think it'd be fantastic to use an event like that every year to showcase what you all do. Let kids have some hands-on experiences with the amateur radios and the people that do it. And I will stand next to you and bring you on television with me and say, this is why this is important. So we're trying to engage our partners in events like this to show the public what we are all doing, that we take this very seriously and for very good reason. And if we're all taking it seriously, and volunteers like you all are willing to do what you do, then the least that the people in the public can be motivated to do is to go do those 4 things and get themselves ready, because we're getting ourselves ready. And I thank you for being here today and at this conference to help all of us get ready, because every year we have to deal with the fact that hurricanes, fortunately, don't come around too often in any one location, but the insidious nature of hurricanes is such that what that causes is people to forget that it's a problem. And we got to remind them, because it's a matter of when, not if, the next hurricane hits our communities. And you all have, again, a huge role in at least 3 areas: the real-time data, helping us get the historical record right for all kinds of reasons. And I think increasingly we can work together on outreach and education. We can't do enough of that, because it really can change the outcome if the public has planned in advance. So I wanted to just share with you some of those stories and why I'm so passionate about what you do and so thankful for what you do. And just wanted to share with you my thoughts there. But I'm willing to stay a few more minutes here if you have a couple of
Yep.
questions before I head to talk to the media.
Yep, you got a gentleman right there with
Yes,
a
sir.
question.
Yeah, I would suggest that you include Tampa, St. Petersburg area in Florida, because the people in
Yes.
central Florida are not going to go to
Well, yeah, you're right. You know, and we do mix it up again. We did do the awareness tour stop in Tampa twice in the last decade, and we need to go back there again, because Tampa area, the Tampa Bay area, is one of the areas. I mean, I'm concerned about a lot of areas, but Tampa really scares me, because it's been so long since a direct hit from a major hurricane, and the storm surge potential there is tremendous, and the population is so much greater than it was in 1921 when they were hit so hard.
the growth of that corridor,
Yes.
north of Tampa, all the way through the villages, which is Hurricane Alley,
Yeah.
is tremendous, and those people are not prepared, they know nothing.
I couldn't agree with you more. And we gotta do some work together to get them prepared. So thank you for your passion and understanding of the seriousness of the situation there, and there are many other areas that we're very much concerned about. So what we try to do is mix up the cities that we stop at this tour, but at the same time, we're trying to expand how we do National Hurricane Preparedness Week in mid-May, so that even if the plane doesn't stop in your town, there are activities going on in your town. And local weather service forecast offices, emergency managers, and folks like you can make that a reality. And you'll see us trying to drive some of that. And this is not just domestic, by the way. We stopped in Canada and Halifax last year on the East Coast tour, and I want to do that again next year. So, and I think you all know, we have official international forecast responsibility in the Atlantic, Gulf, Caribbean, Eastern Pacific. Our international partners are obviously very keen on what you all do, and I know you have international tentacles as well, people throughout the Caribbean area that we are concerned with. So thank you for your collaboration internationally. Any other questions? Anything you ever wanted to ask or say? And I know that there's a social media connection with what you all do. If you happen to be on Twitter, I'm NHC Director. And if you go to the Hurricane Center website, you can see all of our social media accounts. That's another way to stay in touch. And I will leave, Julio, before I walk out of this room, I will leave a stack of cards up here, right up here before I walk out of the room, so you can pick that up and have my email address and know how to get hold of me.
Very good.
So, anything else you want me to?
Yes, we have one more thing for you.
Okay.
And so we have one more thing for Dr. Knapp before he leaves us. And I'm going to have Julio Rapol, WD4R, come up here and actually, I've been told all of the presenters to come up here for this special presentation.
Dr. Knapp, thank you for everything. Thank you for all your support of all the Hamilton radio operators, not just the local ones, but nationally and internationally. And we heard you were interested in something with this, that you want to become a hand with your son.
Yes, you heard accurately.
So we brought a representative from the American Radio Relay League.
Awesome, I love it. Great, great.
Julio contacted me and thought it would be a great idea if we could present with him
Oh, this is
this
fantastic.
ham radio license manual. And when he
Thank you.
mentioned your son was also interested, I think that's a great opportunity for father and son to bond. So we want him to have his own.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. For those of you who don't know, yes, this is wonderful. For those that are not aware, I have an 11-and-a-half-year-old son who's actually here with me this week. He might poke his head in during the general session to see if he can stomach 20 minutes of daddy talking in the general session before he goes out to Universal or something. But he is very technically adept. If it has an electrical cord, and especially if it has an internet connection, he's interested in it. And I showed him the amateur radio station, the room at the Hurricane Center, and he just could not get enough of it. And as I've been telling Julio for the last couple of years, Daddy has to make time, and you're motivating me. But my son and I are interested in learning how to do this and getting our own radio at some point, because he will eat that up, and he is a mouth. He loves to talk. He will love communicating with all of you, and this will get us off to a fantastic start. What a wonderful gift. Thank you.
Great, wonderful, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Julio. I'll be around until early Thursday afternoon. Any last question before?
Doctor, is it true that hurricanes have been outlawed in Florida since you took over?
Actually, you know what the real cause of that is? One of my predecessors, Max Mayfield, since he took his job at Channel 10, there's been nothing. And we attribute it to his tenure in the media. So if he just retires, then we'll have hurricanes again. So we need to find him this week and say, Max, don't retire. No, we've been very, very fortunate in Florida the last decade. The luck is going to run out at some point. I hope it's not soon, but it's going to be sooner than we like. And there are, how many years now that have gone by without a major hurricane hitting anywhere in the U.S. and without any hurricane hitting Florida? But we've had major impacts in very many places. Just think of Debbie, Isaac, Sandy, Ike, Irene. It goes on and on. And look what Joaquin did last year in the Bahamas, and how much flooding we got in South Carolina, even without a hurricane directly making landfall. We have to be ready, because Florida's good fortune and other places that are hurricane prone who haven't been hit in a while or who got hit last year, it doesn't matter. We're going to get hit again. And that's why I'm so interested in engaging you and tapping into your resources to help people get ready, because they're starting to forget about the hurricane problem. We got to remind them, because that's a big, big part of having a positive outcome. So again, thanks for all you do. Looking forward to talking with some more of you as the week goes on.
Can we have a group picture?
Sure.
I know you have.
Here we go. That's my fault. I copied.
Take another one? Do one more, yeah.
All right. We're part of the game. For the next 5 minutes, we'll have a whole room up there. One more just because.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks again, everybody.
All right, so we thank Dr. Knabb for his great talk and great presentation there that we did for him on the license manuals. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we'll move on to the next presenter here. And our next presenter is from the Canadian Hurricane Center, and he's been with us for the last couple of years now. He knows quite a bit about amateur radio because his ham radio call is VE1MBR. He's also involved in the Canadian version of the Skywarn program called CanWarn. He's the warning preparedness meteorologist at the Canadian Hurricane Center. I'll introduce Bob Robichaud, VE1MBR. Bob?
All right, thank you very much, Rob, and thank all of you for being here today. It's good to be back at the Hurricane Center, as Rob, Hurricane Conference. It's, as Rob said, I've been to a number of them now, and most of the ones I've attended, I've attended this workshop as well, so good to be back. I'm just going to kind of piggyback on what Dr. Knabb was saying and kind of segue into more of the meteorology behind hurricanes. So what I'm going to talk about is I'll just give you a brief overview of what we do at the Canadian Hurricane Center. Then I'll talk about tropical cyclones, essentially hurricanes and tropical storms, what they are, where they form, when they form, that sort of thing. And from there, I'll talk a little bit about how these storms behave when they enter northern latitudes, because that's a little bit different than the pure hurricanes that we see in the southern latitudes. And then there's a lot of talk in the last year or so about El Nino and what kind of impact that would have on hurricane season. So I'll just give you a brief overview of how El Nino impacted last year's season and kind of give you a sneak preview of what's coming up for the following season, at least as far as El Nino goes. So when I go to outside the country, when I leave Canada, especially when I come down to the more southern latitudes, one of the most common questions I get is, why does Canada have a hurricane center? Well, in fact, we have got a number of damaging storms over the years. You can go as far back as the 1775 storm that is ranked the 8th deadliest hurricane on record based on information from the Hurricane Center in Miami. We've had the Saxby Gale in 1869, which was a very damaging storm, all the way up to Hazel in 1954, which was a severe flooding event that occurred in our most highly populated city in Canada, up to the more recent storms like Category 2 Hurricane Juan that made landfall in 2003 in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and the Igor in 2010, Arthur in 2014. But if this doesn't get the message across, this is essentially the tracks of all the tropical cyclones in the Atlantic dating back to as far back as we have records, and that's 1851. And in that yellow circle there is underneath all those tracks is eastern Canada. So clearly hurricanes are a threat in Canada, and that's why we have a hurricane center. So we're located on the east coast in the city of Halifax in Nova Scotia, and we're not really there to kind of take over what the National Hurricane Center does. We're there to complement the information that they have. As Dr. Nam mentioned earlier, they are the Regional Specialized Meteorological Center, or the RSMC, for the World Meteorological Organization. So they're responsible for the Atlantic Ocean and the Eastern Pacific. And we're not there to replace what they do. What we're there for is to provide some additional information, some more focused information for Canadians when these storms approach our waters or our land territory. And what we would do, we would issue a bulletin or warnings when a storm is approaching. This response zone is the delineation between when we would actually start issuing bulletins on a particular storm, when we expect the storm to cross that line within about a 3-day period. So 3 days before the storm would cross that thin red line, we would start issuing bulletins on it. So as I mentioned, we work very closely with Dr. Nab and his team at the Hurricane Center. We send forecasters down to Miami about 2 a year to get trained on tropical meteorology. The picture you see there at the top of the screen is from the course from this year. It was a 2-week course on tropical meteorology. A couple of our meteorologists were down for that. Now we do monitor activity in the entire Atlantic Ocean, but as I said, we would only issue bulletins when a storm is entering our response zone. Over the last few years, we've had very, very close interaction with our emergency managers, and it was actually one of our local emergency managers that laid the groundwork for me to get my amateur radio license. So we've worked very closely with our emergency management partners and the media as well. And as Dr. Nam mentioned earlier, just to kind of underline how we work closely together, the Hurricane Awareness Tour actually kicked off last year in Halifax where the Hercules, Hurricane Hunter, and the G4, the Hercules flies into the storm and the G4 flies around it and over top. They kicked off the Hurricane Awareness Tour in Canada. So a little bit about tropical cyclones. The image you see here is essentially a satellite picture of Patricia, one of the strongest, if not the strongest hurricane on record from last year. So what are tropical cyclones? They're essentially a non-frontal low pressure system over the tropical or subtropical ocean. And they consist of an organized area thunderstorm activity, and there is a definite closed center of circulation. You have to have that center of circulation to be classified as a tropical cyclone. Now, tropical cyclones are there to redistribute heat that's stored in the ocean up into the atmosphere. Over the course of the summer, the sun comes up, heats the ocean. That creates an imbalance. So there's a tremendous amount of heat stored in the ocean. Nature tries to counteract that imbalance, and it does so by the formation of tropical cyclones. And hurricane is a regionally specific name for tropical cyclone. In the Atlantic and Eastern Pacific, they're called hurricanes. In the Western Pacific, they're called typhoons, but they're all the same storm with respect to the structure. There's a couple of things that we need for these things to form. One is a pre-existing disturbance containing abundant convection or very bubbly air in the lower levels of the atmosphere. Of course, the whole purpose of the hurricane is to dissipate heat that's stored in the ocean, so we need very warm water, usually about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. A moist and unstable air mass, so warm in the lower levels and cold in the upper levels, and low vertical wind shear. So that means that hurricanes don't like an environment where the winds are changing a lot as you go up in the atmosphere. So not changing with respect to speed or direction, because these storms form in what we call towers, towering cumulus clouds. So if there's a lot of wind shear, the storm actually gets sheared apart before it can really get going. So if there's a lot of wind shear, we tend to have fewer hurricanes, and that'll come up a little bit later. So you can see the image on the bottom here showing the spiraling bands that flow towards the center of the hurricane. There's a tremendous amount of air flowing counterclockwise in towards the center. As that air is flowing into the center, it's also rising. And as it's rising, it actually flows up the top of the hurricane. And most of the air actually flows up towards the outside of the hurricane, the top of the hurricane. Some of it actually comes down into the center of the hurricane. Whenever you have descending air, you tend to get warming because of compression, and that's why the eye of the hurricane, at least in the stronger storms, is clear right down to the ocean, because that air in the center of the storm is actually descending, and it's warming, and it's drying out as it's going down. So that's why hurricanes have an eye. Now, there are different classifications of tropical cyclones, most of it based on wind speed. When a kind of a disturbed area of weather or a clump of thunderstorms develops in the atmosphere, over the ocean, and there's no center of circulation, however, and the winds are less than 23 miles per hour, it's classified as a tropical disturbance. If that system is allowed to intensify and the winds reach between 23 and 39 miles per hour, and we can detect a closed center of circulation, then that storm is classified as a tropical depression, and it gets a number. And it gets a number and a lot closer scrutiny by the Hurricane Center as it's going wherever it's going. If that same storm is allowed to intensify even further and the winds reach 40 to 73 miles per hour, that's when it gets a name and is classified as a tropical storm. And if it intensifies even further and the winds reach 74 miles per hour, that's when it's classified as a hurricane, and we have 5 categories of hurricane, and category 3, 4, and 5 are what we consider major hurricanes. So the typical life cycle of these things, I mean, they can form in in anywhere in the tropical Atlantic, in the Gulf of Mexico. The typical scenario that we see is a disturbance to make it off the coast of Africa, and then to intensify as it's heading across the Atlantic, and then it becomes a tropical storm, and then a hurricane, and often what they'll do, they'll start to recurve, and then transform themselves into what looks more like a winter storm with respect to the structure. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later when I talk about how storms behave in northern latitudes. So hurricane season starts June 1st, extends until the end of November, and we really start to see things picking up in August into September, because that's when the water temperature actually reaches its maximum towards the end of the summer into the early fall. So September is the peak month for hurricane season, and September, right around September 10th, statistically, is the date that's had the highest number of tropical cyclones in the Atlantic Ocean. The hazards, Dr. Nam mentioned them earlier. Storm surge, that's the main killer for tropical cyclones here in the U.S. Also, of course, wind is a major hazard with hurricanes, heavy rainfall, flash flooding, tornadoes, waves, and rip currents as well. So I mentioned that these storms behave a little bit differently when they start to come up into northern latitudes. So going back to this image that I had earlier, so the storms, when they start to move up, what we have out in the Atlantic Ocean is what we call the Bermuda High, and that circulates clockwise in the entire Atlantic. So sometimes it's strong, sometimes it's weak, but the tropical cyclones will usually circumnavigate this big Bermuda High. And then once they start to come up into the northern latitudes, they start to change structure. And there's a couple of different things that can happen to these storms as they're coming up towards northern latitudes. In the first case here, we have the jet stream that is dipping down, but not too far down, well away from the center of the storm itself. And then in this case, the storm can make landfall here in Florida or keep going into the Gulf of Mexico. Another scenario is where the storm is tracking a little bit further north and just sticks very close to that Bermuda High. And in this particular setup of the jet stream, all the east coast of the U.S. into eastern Canada would typically be warm and humid, which is a good environment for the hurricane to maintain some of its intensity. Now it's going over colder water at this time, so it will be weakening, but it may weaken slower than it normally would based on this weather pattern. Another pattern that we typically see is when the jet stream dips down a lot further south. This is a typical scenario of what you'd see in the late fall, kind of late September into October. And in this case, when the hurricane meets the jet stream, because of all that wind shear, because the jet stream is a river of very strong air in the upper levels of the atmosphere, the storm just gets ripped apart and weakens quite rapidly. But every now and then, we have a storm that approaches the trough of the jet stream here, the tip of the bottom of the jet stream, and then starts to, what we like to say, gets picked up by the jet stream. And there may be some weakening at first, but then that's followed by some further strengthening. And we've seen a lot of examples of that over the years, and we're getting to be pretty good at forecasting what will happen when this particular phenomenon occurs. And part of that is what happens to the rainfall pattern. When we have the process of the tropical system becoming a more like a winter type storm is called extratropical transition. And the final result is what we call a post-tropical storm. It keeps that name, so if we have Tropical Storm Rob or Hurricane Rob, if it transforms itself, it may become Post-Tropical Storm Rob. So it keeps its name even though it's no longer a pure hurricane. But what we know happens to the rainfall when it's a pure hurricane, we have heavy rain on both sides of the storm. When we're going through this transition, the rain shifts to the left-hand side of the track, where often there may be no rain at all on the right-hand side of the track, and quite often there may not be any cloud on the right-hand side of the track. All the heavier rain, all the flooding rain will be on the left-hand side of the track. And a good example of that is Hurricane Irene from 2011. Caused extensive flooding in Vermont. The storm actually came up through New York and pretty much followed the border of Maine and, not Maine, but New Hampshire and Vermont. And Vermont got all the rain, and this is what resulted from all that flooding rainfall. Now, the opposite thing happens to the wind. Because the storm is accelerating, it's picking up speed, the wind speed on the right-hand side of the track does not diminish quite as much as it does on the left-hand side of the tracks. So the end result is that you have all your damaging wind on the right-hand side of the track. Meanwhile, all your rain is on the left-hand side of the track. So we can distinguish between these two hazards a lot better when the storm goes through this transition. An example of this is Sandy in 2012, where you can see here some of the, just looking at some of the numbers, the wind is definitely stronger on the right-hand side of the track, and they got a lot more precipitation on the left-hand side of the track, although you don't see the numbers for precipitation here. Sandy is one example. Irene would be another good example, because as the storm was going up through Vermont and New Hampshire, Vermont was getting all the rain. Meanwhile, eastern parts of Massachusetts were getting hurricane-force wind gusts, while there was no damaging wind in Vermont at all. So a very clear distinction between the rainfall and the wind when these storms come up into northern latitudes. Another thing that only happens when the storm is accelerating is what happens to the waves. In a purely tropical weather system, it's in the tropics, the storm is moving quite slowly, and it's generating waves. And the storm is moving so slowly that the waves move out ahead of the storm because the waves move faster than the storm. In the case of a winter storm, it's the opposite. The storm actually moves faster and kind of outstrips its own waves. So what you'll typically see is the waves crashing on shore a little bit after the winter storm has gone by. So now think of a purely tropical storm. It's generating waves. The waves are moving out ahead of it. But now the storm is accelerating. So now all of a sudden you have this area within the storm where the waves that are being created are in harmony with the storm itself. And when that happens, that allows the waves to build and build and build and build and reach heights that we didn't even know were possible. And one example of that is back in 1995, we had the QE2 luxury liner that was on its way from Europe to New York City. And as it was approaching, they knew there was a storm coming, but it was somewhat weakening. The winds were still strong, but it was accelerating. So there was a part of the storm where the waves were building to incredible heights. None of this was actually observed by any buoys out there, but until the ship got close to where that area of large waves were. So in a very short distance, the ship encountered waves of 9 meters and then 29 meters, which is 95 feet. So in no time at all, it went through something it could handle to 95-foot waves. And then for a short period of time. It didn't last too long, thank goodness. But it gives you an idea of how this particular hazard can be very dangerous to folks who are out on the sea. And then if you look at the bottom graph down here, this is from another storm which occurred a couple of years ago, Gonzalo. This is from a buoy that's off the coast of Newfoundland. And basically, I won't get into the numbers here, but you can see how fast the wave height actually rises. So think of someone that's going to the coast to see the waves, which a lot of people tend to do. They want to see the majestic waves crashing on shore. And a lot of people don't know of this particular hazard where you can get into these large waves in a short period of time. So we've lost a lot of people all along the coast in Canada, down into New England, because of this phenomenon that a lot of people don't know about. And this only happens in the northern latitudes because the storm is accelerating as it's going through the northern latitudes. So just finishing off, just kind of talking a little bit about El Nino and its impact on last year's hurricane season. First of all, what is El Nino? El Nino is essentially a warm patch of water, warmer than the average, that's off the coast of South America, and it creates havoc on weather patterns all around the globe. Essentially what we have in what we call a neutral situation, where there's no El Nino, is we have the easterly trade winds blowing from east to west, and that pushes some of the warmer water towards the west, and what happens is what we call upwelling. So we have water that's in that part of the Pacific Ocean moving westward. That has to be replaced by deeper water that's colder, and so we get cooler water in the eastern Pacific and warmer water in the western Pacific. That's kind of what we call a neutral condition. In the case of an El Nino, those easterly trade winds actually get a lot lighter, and it cuts off this upwelling. So there's no longer cooler water from the lower levels of the ocean coming up to replace that warmer water. So that results in this huge patch of warm water off the coast of South America. Now the opposite of that is what we call La Nina. Now La Nina is a case where the easterly trade winds blow a little bit stronger, and that increases the upwelling, causing a lot colder water in that area of the Pacific compared to average. So you might ask, well, how does water temperature in the Pacific have an impact on hurricanes in the Atlantic? Well, what happens is the El Nino creates stronger westerly winds in the tropics, and that causes more wind shear in the Atlantic Ocean. The profile here that you see, the red line shows wind speed and direction in the Atlantic Ocean in the case of a La Nina. So as you're going up in the atmosphere, the winds stay about the same. So there's not a lot of wind shear when we have a La Nina situation. When we have an El Nino, we have slightly stronger easterly winds in the Atlantic, not in the Pacific, but in the Atlantic. But we also have that stronger winds in the upper levels of the atmosphere as well. So much more wind shear in the Atlantic Ocean when we have a El Nino situation. And last year, at the end of hurricane season, this is what we saw. The red indicates water temperature that's warmer than average. So clearly, you can see that that part of the Pacific Ocean that we look at for El Nino showed that the water temperature was above average, so warmer than average. So clearly a strong El Nino, one of the strongest ever on record, as a matter of fact. So what impact did that have on the hurricane season? Well, we had 11 named storms. The average is 12, 4 hurricanes, and the average is 6, and 2 major hurricanes, and the average is 3. So clearly we were a bit on the low side with respect to average hurricanes, and you can see with the Pacific Ocean being warmer, the Pacific had clearly more storms than average. So what's going on right now? So this is the map that I got from this morning, showing the area of concern for El Nino. And you can see that the water level, although the water temperature, although still warm, is not nearly as warm as it was back in December. So what we're looking at is a cooling trend in the water in the Pacific, which is indicating that we're heading out of this El Nino, which is an inhibitor to hurricanes. If we look at what the water temperature might be out there during hurricane season, this is a ensemble forecast, or a series of model runs showing the water temperature over the next few months. And anything below this red line is essentially not an El Nino anymore. It's either a neutral, or if it's below the blue line, it's actually it's actually the opposite of El Nino, and it's a La Nina situation. The yellow rectangle here is basically hurricane season. So most of the models that predict water temperature, that predict what the El Nino is going to be like during hurricane season, most of these models do not show any El Nino once hurricane season starts in June. So we're either going to be in a neutral situation or La Nina. But the key thing here is that we won't be in an El Nino situation during this coming hurricane season, or at least probably not. So finally, regardless of the amount, the number of storms that we get in the Atlantic this season, I just want to reiterate what Dr. Nab said earlier, the importance of getting your weather reports. He mentioned his example of how one report from an amateur radio operator changed the historical documentation on a particular storm. We have a lot of examples as well, where a report from an amateur radio operator either generated some weather warnings or caused us to maintain weather warnings where we would have otherwise ended them. So I can't reiterate enough how important your reports are to the forecasters who are sitting on the desk, and I like the way that Dr. Nab put it, that you guys are our eyes, you're our window to what's going on out there. So thank you for your reports, and thank you for your time this afternoon.
All right. Well, we thank Bob for the great presentation. And what we'll be doing for folks is we will have a Q&A at the end of the workshop, and that includes for our folks on the live stream as well. So with that, I'll introduce our next speaker, and definitely a gentleman that I've learned a lot from over the years, and his name is Julio Ripoll, WD4R. One of the founder of the amateur radio operation at WX4NHC, the amateur radio station at the National Hurricane Center. Have been involved with him now for 12 years. It's been a great partnership, not only with our VoIP Hurricane Net, but also with our operations at WX1BOX, the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Taunton, Mass. Amateur radio station. And as Bob's already alluded to, we've had a little action on that front in the last few years from a tropical system perspective. So with that, I'll turn it over to Julio.
Thank you, Rob. Alrighty, well, thank you very much for making the effort and taking the time to come and watch our presentations here. And I echo how important you all have been to sending in all your reports for the past 36 years. So my name's Julio Ripoll. My call sign is WD4R. I've been a ham since 1976. So we're talking about the hurricane season of last year, and mainly with the Florida perspective. And as you can see, we had 11 tropical cyclones, 4 were hurricanes, and 2 reached major hurricane strength. But it looks like most of the tropical systems hit Canada, and that's why Bob was here this year to explain why that happened. And it appears that 2014 also affected Canada greatly with Hurricane Arthur, which hit Nova Scotia. And that was one of the great examples of the partnership between the National Hurricane Center in Miami and the Canadian Hurricane Center, where we actually spoke directly to each other during the hurricane as it made landfall there. So meanwhile in Florida, we haven't seen or felt hurricanes for a few years now. It's because of La Nina, as Bob explained. And he also explained La Nina is becoming what we call La Nada, which is nothing or neutral, and will turn into El Nino soon. So let's not keep our guard down. Let's remember that things could happen And here in Florida, this is what could happen. Florida is the leading state of landfalling hurricanes, with 114 hurricanes falling, 37 of them major hurricanes. Texas following with 64, with 19 majors, Louisiana with 57 and 20. So while you're visiting Florida, don't forget the new hurricane evacuation plan. Very important. So who we are and what we do. Well, we started with an invitation from Dr. Neil Frank back in 1980. And he said, you know, every time a hurricane hits the Caribbean, we can't get in touch with them. Everything goes down. Back then we were using radio teletype and they just shut down. So he says, let's get some hams in here so they can talk directly to people on the island. So that's when we started, and they picked up somebody that could walk across the street. And you'll notice where the Hurricane Center was located, in a high-rise building, okay, on the 6th floor, the only floor with hurricane shutters. That wasn't that good during Hurricane Andrew in 1992. I'll explain that later. This was our first basic setup here, and we would just basically bring our radio equipment in, put it on one of the forecaster's desk. If anybody can decipher the formulas behind there, you win the lottery. And we would just basically run a long wire antenna out the window on the 6th floor. And that was the young ham that started there. The first radio used, by the way, was a Yaesu FT101EX, which he would bring across the street from the University of Miami in a cardboard box. That's how the humble beginnings of the station. Eventually we thought, well, what if we get hit directly with a hurricane? It hadn't happened for many years, so we built a Go Kit in an aluminum box, and it weighed close to 200 pounds, so it never went anywhere. But here again, in 1992, Hurricane Andrew substantially damaged that high-rise building. We had leaks everywhere, ceiling tiles falling down. All the antennas basically flew off the roof of this 12-story building. One of the generators actually ended up down on the ground on the parking lot. That's how bad it was. And of course, the Doppler antenna dome flew into pieces. So the government decided that, well, it's about time the Hurricane Center got a hurricane-proof building. So in 1995, they built a hurricane-proof building. It's actually built with 10-inch thick steel reinforced walls, solid concrete, okay? And it's up above the floodplain. And then there are 2 rooms which are EF5 tornado-proof. They're 20-inch thick concrete reinforced steel walls, and they're disguised as bathrooms. So if you see people running to the bathroom, it's, you know, probably time for everybody to go to the bathroom. So when we built the Hurricane Center there, it was during the busiest season at that time on record, which we had 18 named storms. At the same time, we're pulling through about 3,000 foot of coax cable from the roof to 7 antennas. And the Hurricane Center has computer access flooring, which is hollow. It's only about 1.5 feet, and we were pulling all that stuff through there. Just a matter of fact, the Hurricane Center had been through 2 eyes of hurricanes, and that was both in 2005, Katrina and Wilma. And that's the time when you saw all the hurricane forecasters who hadn't been in the eye of the storm running out there to look up. Yeah, we're in it. So this is the Hurricane Center here. It's a state-of-the-art facility. We have 2 large diesel generators and enough fuel to power the Hurricane Center for about 3 weeks without any commercial power at all. This year, for the first time in about 20 years, Yaesu, which is the first radio company, the first radio we used at the Hurricane Center, donated a new complete station. So we got one of the state-of-the-art HF and VHF and UHF stations there. We're running about 600 watts output right now, so hopefully you guys can hear us. And all the equipment there, including the antennas, which were specifically designed for 150 mile per hour winds, were donated by private companies. And just a little factoid there about hurricanes and antennas. When we had Hurricane Wilma hit us directly, and that was a strange hurricane that came from the west over the Everglades with a lot of debris, all our antennas stayed up and only 2 verticals got bent, but everything stayed up on the air. All the satellite dishes blew into pieces. They flew everywhere. This is the digital side here, and we do a bunch of digital modes. We don't do them all, but we do Echolink, of course, which Rob will explain later, IRLP, which is basically a bunch of VHF, UHF repeaters connected through the internet. So we have both RF and internet going at the same time. We do HF WindLink, and that was, Dr. Nab was explaining about that sailboat during Hurricane Adrian. That sailboat had sent me an email through WindLink. It says, we are in the eye of the storm, here are our weather data readings. And so I said, okay, fine, I showed them, and it was coincidental. The next day they were having their big conference with all the hurricane forecasters to put together the historical track of Adrian. And Dr. Nab and Max Mayfield called me and says, is there any way you can get the data dump from that station? I had no idea. Here's a sailboat in the middle of nowhere. And I said, well, I could try. So I sent a WindLink email, which, if you don't know what WindLink is, basically it's email like you and I use over the internet, but it's actually over HF radio. It converts it into tones, bounces off the ionosphere, back down to Earth, and that sailboat answered back within the hour with the entire data dump for the last 24 hours of that hurricane. And Dr. Nab called me and says, you realize what this does? I said, no, I really didn't know. He says, well, we just told everybody the hurricane landed in the wrong country. I said, oh my God. But he quickly fixed that, and I'll tell you another couple stories about related things like that where ham radio made a large impact. We have approximately 30 operators. They're all handpicked. They come from all unique backgrounds. We have a cardiologist that was the head of cardiology for a large hospital, a surgeon, a couple engineers, one architect, people from the federal government, some retired, some active duty, some military veterans. I mean, you have a cross-section of everything you can imagine. And then a couple guys from New England that come down to Florida in shorts, which is required, so. And so we get on the air. Sometimes we have as many as 4 operators going at a time, depending on where the landfall is and how much information is coming back to us. And we need that many people because we're handling on HF the Hurricane WatchNet, the VoIP on another computer. Then we have VHF if it's hitting us locally. We also have to communicate to the local agency, the Emergency Operations Center. I mean, we may have things going on, and then we have someone doing all the digital work. So it can get very hectic there. So in 36 years, we've been under 9 Hurricane Center director, and we have handled over 100 hurricanes and thousands of report. As an example, just Hurricane Sandy alone was 400 reports for that one storm. And like someone mentioned here, it's a curious fact. Ever since Dr. Nab became our director, we haven't had any hurricanes. So let's hope it continues for many years to come. Our purpose and goals, basically to collect surface reports. And those are reports from people like you that are actually in the storm, or you can relay reports, and we don't hear everything. So you may be where the signal is falling from the Caribbean in a best place, and we had relays on the Hurricane WatchNet as far west as Nevada, and even as far north as Canada, where we couldn't hear them directly, especially like if it hit Bermuda, and they would be relaying those reports. And those reports are very special because they're in real time, and it lets them know how far out the winds go, the barometric pressure, which way is it going, up or down, is the storm veering at all from one way or the other. The second thing is we actually do provide backup emergency communications for the Hurricane Center if we get a direct hit. That's happened a few times. Our power usually does not go out because we have 2 massive generators back there, and 2 of our antennas are wire antennas. And the reason we use wires instead of big beams, they can flex. They don't break, they don't fly away, and they can fly in the wind like a flag, and we still get through. One time we had a call from the hurricane hunter. It was going through the eye of one of the hurricane centers and got hit by lightning. You were on the air, I believe, at that time. And we have special frequencies and permissions as amateur radio operators to talk directly to the hurricane hunters. They have 2 radio positions in their planes, and one of them, the captain told me, is tuned in to 14.325. And he says, if we're gonna take a dip, we're gonna put our coordinates there because we know 50 hams are gonna hear it. Third thing is, we actually provide advisories over the ham radio for people in the storms. And you would think, well, nowadays, I mean, we have internet, we have all the advisories on there, we watch the news and all that. Well, if you're in the Yucatan and Hurricane Michelle's coming at you, it's a Category 5, and all you have is a little AM radio, well, that actually happened. And our reports were going through the Hurricane Watch and on HF, this Mexican ham was taking those reports and giving it to their local AM broadcast station, little radio station right in the Yucatan there. All those little fishing villages along, they had no other way of receiving that information. So that's another thing that we do. And then, of course, the last thing is to promote and enhance the accuracy and availability of weather data surface reports. We'd like you all to have a weather station. Call us in when you're experiencing the hurricane or near hurricane, or even if you're not, if you the outskirts say, I only have 20-mile-per-hour winds. That way they know how far that wind field goes. And I believe you're going to talk a little more about weather stations in your presentation. And overall, everybody's here because we're on one mission together. We want to help save lives. So how do ham radio operators help during the hurricane season? So here's some examples. We have a vast network. We don't do it all. We depend on everybody here. And the way that they participate, a lot of them is through networks or nets. Hurricane WatchNet being one that we use since our very beginning on HF. Then the VoIP Hurricane Net, which is a combination of IRLP, Echolink. I believe you're combining a few other digital modes now. And we also have local nets. If we get hit in South Florida and even as far as Naples, we'll be connected to their local nets and find out what's happening on the ground. Then there's other things like ONNHC and CWOP, and that's also for hams and non-hams. You have a weather station, you can beacon your weather every 15 minutes to a national map. And we receive that at the Hurricane Center, and we actually look at it. And we can tell what is happening at that moment in time and even dump all your weather data. This is many different ways to contact us during the hurricane. That's on our website, so you don't have to copy it down. If you need this information, you can print it right from our website, wx4nhc.org. Hurricane WatchNet, I can't say enough about them. We've been together since day one. When we started, you've been around since 1965. Okay, and I'll let you give the history lesson on that. But Bobby Graves is here. He's the net manager from Mississippi. And I mean, it's invaluable what they provide because we cannot, number one, we can't hear everything because of propagation. And number two, we're limited in the number of operators we can have there, and we can't conduct the net and look at this and print that. And we actually hand carry our reports to the hurricane forecaster on duty. Okay, we don't email it or anything like that, or we actually walk across from our room to the Hurricane Center room, and we have our own clipboard there with all the data that they have. And if there's anything special, they always tell us, bring it to their attention. And sometimes they do. And of course then, the VoIP Hurricane Net, and I believe we started back in 2004. Okay, and that was Hurricane Ivan was hitting the island of Grenada. And it was the weirdest thing, because I always thought, at that time being, if it's not HF, if it's not RF, it's going to go down. Internet's going to go down. Well, it just so happened during that hurricane hitting Grenada, we had no propagation. We couldn't hear them at all. But we could hear another ham in St. Lucia. That ham in St. Lucia had a 40-meter connection on 7 megahertz, okay, to Grenada. So he would take their reports and he would relay over the VoIP net, which then we could get on our computers. So all this relaying, all this linking got the message through back and forth, which was very important because they did get hit very hard. And that's when the president or prime minister of Grenada was actually put off the ship into a cruise ship, if you remember that. So they didn't think you'd be safe on the island. There's many other ways you can send us reports. CWOP, please, you can look at it online there. There's a free program that you can download if you have a weather station that does all the hard work for you as far as formatting information and putting it on the NOAA's Mesonet site. And on that, we would click on, if you're a ham operator, you can also use APRS. We would click on there to have your call sign and a unique number that they assign to you, and we can get your real-time data. We can also get your last 12 or 24 hours of data there. And we've used that extensively, especially on the U.S. landfalling storms, and you can tell, like Hurricane Charlie when it was coming across from the west, and you see all the wind vanes and pointing, and you see the format of the eye, and of course the backside of the eye had nothing, because those stations either blew away or went off the air. But you can see the pattern and the wind coming through there. So here's a few examples of surface reports and some examples of the forms we use at the Hurricane Center. And in the packet, I gave you one of the forms that we use, and not only can you use it to actually write it down what you need, but it's the format we actually present, and the hurricane forecasters like that format. Okay, for non-hams or even hams, you can fill out that form online, hit send, and it prints out right at our station, okay? And then this is the form that we use, for instance, when we get reports on HF, we actually write down the reports, and it's a good reference to use because we can tell if something's missing. In the heat of the battle, you got 3, 4 things going on, you have several signals on the air, and we can come back and say, wait a minute, you gave us the wind speed, but what about the wind directions? That's just as important. We've even gotten those forms faxed to us from St. Croix. When everything else went down, the only thing he had left was his fax machine. So he faxed it to us, and it worked perfectly. We have also a couple hurricane chasers that are brave souls that go out there and send us reports. We don't promote that. We promote safety, but if they're out there, we'll accept the reports. And here's one here from, these are a couple hams, the storm study team, John Van Pelt and Danny Munster. And here's another one. This was during Hurricane Charlie, and this is a very well-known hurricane chaser named Mark Saduth and Jesse Bass from the HURT team. That's H-I-R-T, not H-U-R-T. And I remember when, by the way, Mark just got his amateur radio license. Back then during Charlie, he didn't have it, so he called me on his cell phone. And he was, you can hear the wind noise in the background. He had parked his truck underneath the overpass, and the winds were blowing 145 miles per hour. And he's screaming in there, he says, I'm never, ever gonna do this again. He was back next year. We have some reports we never expect. Here was a ham that was on a oil platform in the middle of the Gulf during what was then a tropical storm Cindy. And that's what it was classified at that time until we got all his reports and we verified that he was running some commercial weather equipment plus a handheld. Is how do you do that? How do you stand out in 100-mile-per-hour wind with a handheld anemometer? He says, I just stuck it out the window. It would blow your hand off. But he was sending these reports, and then post-hurricane, it was actually, post-storm, it was actually upgraded to a hurricane. A lot of it based on these reports. And I know some people do D-Star, which is basically a digital form of radio that interconnects all these stations digitally. We don't have that yet at the Hurricane Center. So a person named John Davis, WB4QDX, volunteered to coordinate a network of it, and that was fantastic. So we don't have the equipment, the antenna, or the personnel to man that specific mode yet. So what he did, and we tested it 2 years in a row, worked perfectly. We got, on one of our tests, we got over 50 reports. And I know that there's a D-Star Hurricane Net here. And what they do is they gather the reports, whether it's verbally, and they fill out their own form, or digitally through a system called DRATS. And that's all sent directly to us, and we print it out, and it's in the same format that the hurricane forecasters are using. So, can ham radio make a difference? Is ham radio too old, the technology too old? Well, many years ago, there was a very well-known TV reporter, last name Williams, who came in there and he says, you guys are all a bunch of dinosaurs. This is this old technology. I mean, we have satellite phones now. I said, really? I said, well, Mr. Williams, I said, next time you're in Bermuda during Hurricane Fabian, why don't you go outside and call me on your satellite phone? Let me know what's going on. I'll tell you a little bit more about satellite phones and how that could not work sometimes. So our first hurricane, Hurricane Allen, was a major hurricane. It hit the island of St. Lucia. That's what started this whole thing. The first year that Dr. Neil Frank says, we need some hams here. And then we get hit by this thing. It lasted 3 weeks. Hit St. Lucia. We were on the air on the Hurricane Watch Net, and the ham that was on there said, we need help. Our island's destroyed. We need medical help. Just by coincidence, the British hospital ship called the HMS Glasgow was nearby. Says we can be there within a day's sailing, but we need permission from the Prime Minister because you have independence from Great Britain. In about an hour, that ham had the Prime Minister over ham radio give permission to the HMS Glasgow for landing. Then later on, that same hurricane, and I remember this is the first year, we're green behind the ears. Here's some kid who's only 22 years old, a student at the university, trying to put this whole thing together. We were on the air 24/7 for 3 weeks. Then it hits dead on to Brownsville, Texas. And the last teletype communications from NWS Brownsville was, God help us. And then we had a ham at that station with a car battery, wire antenna, call us back. Dr. Neil Frank sat there for hours at this hurricane made landfall. That cemented ham radio into the hurricane center. So no matter if we're having a very low few years, don't forget 1992, we had one hurricane, the first hurricane, came to Cat 5 within about 18 hours, hit South Florida, caused incredible damage. I mean, and blew the roof off of my house, and 300,000 homes were severely damaged. The hams came in right after that, over 200 of them. As far up as New England, they came down and coordinated things because there's a thing back then we didn't think about. It's called interoperability. You had the military there, you had the local police officers there, you have fire and rescue, and they're all communicating on different frequencies, different modes, and all that. So then the Department of Emergency Management says, you know what, we're gonna put a ham at each command post and the center, and we're gonna link them up. And we did that for 2 weeks after that. And that helped quite a bit. How has ham radio impacted, other than the Hurricane Adrian story that Dr. Knapp said? Very quickly, we had in 1998 a hurricane named George, and as it came off the coast of Haiti, and this is 1998, we didn't have very good visuals of it. At that time, Cuba would not allow our planes to fly over their territory. And this Cuban hurricane forecaster, the only Cuban hurricane forecaster in Miami, Lixian Avila, was very animated. In the middle of the night, runs into the Radio Shack. He says, I want you to get a ham operator on the most eastern point of Cuba. I was like, what? You can't just pick out somebody, you know. We got on the air with the Civil Defense from Havana, and we said, excuse me, but we need a ham in the most eastern point of Cuba. The guy came back in Punto Este, on the most eastern point of Cuba. I said, we need your reports. We need to know what's going on. Because the eye had clouded over. We didn't know the tracking. He came on, he started screaming that he was in 2 feet of water in his house, standing on a chair, and he kept giving us the wind report in kilometers per hour, 88 kilometers per hour, 90 kilometers per hour. And Lixion's standing behind me. He says, I don't need that. He says, I want the wind direction. And the guy in his last three words said, del sur, del sur, del sur, from the south. Lixion ran out of there. He says, that's all I need. I had no idea what happened. What just happened? Then the 11 o'clock news came on, and Max Mayfield's sitting there with a little piece of paper there. And it's one of our forms. I'm like, oh my God, I hope that we didn't make a mistake. He says, well, we just changed the forecast track of Hurricane George. It's actually going towards the north instead of towards the south. And it was based on that person's geographic location and his wind direction and the time. And that's how they recalculated that. So ham radio made a large impact on that. 2001, Hurricane Michelle. We were getting live reports from the Isle of Youth in Cuba. Okay? I don't know how he got them, but they were the actual radar coordinates from their radar system. So all night he was giving us the exact coordinates of that eye. And then we thought after it passed over Cuba, the southern half of the eye started opening up. And we thought central circulation is being lost and all that. And so we started getting some reports from a sailboat on a little island called Highborn Key. They were at dock. He kept saying he had readings of over 100 miles per hour. And the forecaster was like, wait a minute, they didn't have the plane up at that time. And the satellite pictures show the southern half of the eye opening up like if it was falling apart. And Max actually got on the ham radio and talked to him. He says, what type of weather equipment are you using? Is Raytheon. He says, okay, that's a good type of weather. And he kept going on at him. And at that time, the Bahamas Met Office was about to lower their hurricane warnings. And Max got on the phone, called the Bahamas, and said, don't. We have verified reports. You still have a hurricane coming. Later on, he explained to me all the dynamics of wind mass. Even though it may not be visible, that wind is still rotating in there. So there again, ham radio may help save some lives by keeping the hurricane warnings up until it went through the Bahamas. And that's the ham operator from inside his sailboat that called in all the reports. Another one that we made a big impact to was Hurricane Ivan. And this is also in 2004. And on the bottom it says amateur radio, ham operators throughout the Caribbean region, and those working as part of the National Hurricane Center's WX4NHC and the Hurricane WatchNet. Okay, were indispensable in providing critical reports as Ivan moved through the Windward Islands and across the Caribbean Sea. And a lot of that also came through from Grenada when it hit Grenada, and the VOIP as well, that link that we didn't have. Of course, the Big Easy, when Hurricane Katrina hit them and killed 1,833 people. And we were on the air there for several days through that. And we were one of the first to relay when the Superdome started losing its roof. One of the first reports came through. We went across our hallway there to the FEMA office. They have a FEMA office liaison to Washington, D.C. right there at the Hurricane Center. That was the first time they had heard about it too. And that came through ham radio. And similar situation happened as happened in 1980 during Hurricane Allen, when NWS lost all communications with a couple of their offices. One was Slidell, and they had lost all of their communications equipment. Some of it's called AWIPS, and some of their satellites were lost. And we got a message from headquarters at NWS says we need to communicate with them. So we stayed up on the air for 6 hours with them as Hurricane Katrina went over them and got live reports from them with wind speeds and barometric pressure and all that. And then after that, for all of they have 41 people in there that were trapped because they couldn't get out. All the trees were down, and they wanted to know about their families. So we stayed there until they were able to communicate that their families were okay. Those were some of the actual handwritten reports. You can barely read it because we were kind of in a hurry and nervous at the time. So can we help in other natural disasters? Well, we did. We went, when the earthquake hit Haiti and killed about 300,000 people. University of Miami knew about our work during hurricanes. They had sent 140 doctors and medical staff down there. They had built one of the largest post-war trauma hospitals. Okay? And they sent the doctors down there with 40 satellite phones and 140 GMRS walkie-talkies. Well, one of the things about hams, it's not that they know how to use a walkie-talkie or an appliance, but they are disciplined. They know how to network. So those hams set up a network that became the 911 for Haiti, right in the center there at the airport, right inside that trauma hospital. We were the first to communicate to the hospital ship, Comfort, which is about 2 miles offshore. We coordinated all of the helicopter pickups and drop-offs because they had no land-based communications able to do that at that time. And then we interconnected all of the field hospitals by other organizations that came in, that all they had, one of them had one ham, but all he had was a VHF walkie-talkie. So we set up a command center there for him and relayed all of his needs back and forth. Then we coordinated all the private charter flights for our teams to go back and forth into Haiti. And the supply chain, when they ran out of batteries, they would send us a message and we coordinated and communicate back to the University of Miami in Miami what the needs were then. And the hams, they brought their unique skills. I mean, we had a federal officer as part of our group. He's a ham. The ex-captain of the Chicago Police. We had several military veterans, part of the MARS system, military-affiliated radio system, that came in with their unique skills, which helped incredibly because the HF WindLink, they have military frequencies for that. Very little interference. The messages would get through. And in the center of the pink shirt, we had one of the more valuable player, HH2JR, Jean-Robert Gallier, who I've known for 31 years. And he was so good because when we had problems getting our license and permission to operate there, he hand carried all of our licenses down to their FCC and had them sign off each one personally. And of course, the doctors, many times the doctors themselves got on the air and talked to doctors over here. We have a system, you know, we have a patient that, these are the complications, you know, what can we do? Let's collaborate on it. And they did that not just in Haiti, but they did that for many of the other organizations volunteer there. So this is why we do it. You know, we volunteer our time, our skills for many hours. Our group has been there for tens of thousands of hours. And it's because we care. We care about all people. We have no borders. Ham radio does not have any borders. And I will tell you, I'll finish off with a little story that really touched my heart about a little 3-year-old girl affected by the earthquake in Haiti. And this was from George Rydell, N1EZZ, which was on Team 4 during the Haiti mission. And he is sending this report. We had situation reports sent to us via WindLink. And that night, he sent this report, and I'll read it to you word for word here. And it says, oops. Sorry about that, I gotta scroll down. Okay. He says here, this is a birthday party for a three-year-old girl at the University of Miami Haiti Field Hospital. He says, about midnight one night, a bunch of trauma nurses stopped by at the side of the communications shack. They asked me if I wanted to go to a birthday party in the pediatric recovery ward. He says, there was a 3-year-old girl there, and today was her birthday. So we all went together to the main supply tent first and found a bunch of clean donated toys. So we picked up a few toys with us, and the lady in pink was the girl's mother and gave her the toys. And he says, I must confess, when I got back to my tent, I cried like a baby. So this is why we do what we do. Thank you very much.
All right, everybody, so this completes the first half of the workshop. We are now going to have our break. It's about 3:10 now, or 3:11, so we're going to aim to get back around 3:25 or so, and take about a 15-minute break. For those on the live stream, just an FYI, the live stream will be left on. I believe we have the ability to mute it, and then we'll come back online audio-wise when we're ready to restart. The other item I'll mention is, we did mention door prizes. We have raffle tickets that we'll distribute during the break, and we'll certainly, right before we do the drawings, we'll make sure everybody has a ticket. So with that, we'll get restarted at 3:25. Thank you. It's 3:29, so that's pretty good for a bunch of hams getting together. So, all right, Jim. Let me know if you're ready. I heard that the mic volume was a little low. We did try to crank it up a little bit. Is this better? All right. Oh, who was asking for raffle tickets? All right. And then Jim, let me know when you're ready whenever. Okay.
I wasn't going to interrupt you.
No
problem. Thank you.
Just getting restarted, so. All right. Guess we got everybody reassembled. Jim, you ready to go? All right, so welcome back to the second half of the Amateur Radio Workshop here for the 2016 National Hurricane Conference here in Orlando, Florida. We'll move on to the next presenter, who's a gentleman that I've met here and worked with in the last couple of years. Learned quite a bit from him. Been able to interact with him quite a bit, especially at last year's conference. Running and supporting the longest running hurricane net that Amateur Radio has, the Hurricane Watch Net. Net manager, KB5HAB, Bobby Graves.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here this afternoon in Orlando once again. Yeah, 2 years ago was my first time to make it to the Hurricane Conference, and for anyone that was here that day, it was thundering and lightning like crazy. So thank goodness we got some wonderful weather here today in Orlando. A little bit cold although, but it's great to be here. I've been in ham radio. This coming July will be 28 years. And all 28 years I've been pretty much in the area of emergency preparedness and emergency communications. One of the great things about ham radio, there's so many different facets about it, or something in there for anybody. And I love all parts of it, but I've really felt the emergency preparedness and communications is where I feel at home at. The Hurricane Watch Net for 2016, this will be our 52nd straight season watching for and activating for any hurricanes that affect land anywhere in the Atlantic Basin. Last year was our 50th anniversary and 51st season. The net was founded by Jerry Murphy, K-A-Y-U-W. He's a resident of Cleveland, Ohio. Back in Labor Day weekend of 1965, he was stationed at the Construction Battalion Center in Rhode Island while he was in the Navy. And that weekend, he was working on a net on 14320, a traffic net. And there was a lot of folks asking about Hurricane Betsy. And there was so much traffic going on, it was really disturbing the natural flow of the net. So he asked the net manager if he could move all those asking about the hurricane up to 14325, and he'd help answer all the questions and help relay any traffic he could. He was granted that permission, and a lady in the Panama Canal Zone followed him up to 325. Throughout the rest of that event, they relayed the information to and from those asking about the storm, and that's how the Hurricane Watch Net became formed. Over the years, the Hurricane Watch Net gained a formal direct working relationship with the National Hurricane Center in Miami. 2 years ago at this same very conference, opened up a formal direct working relationship with the Canadian Hurricane Center. Not knowing within just a few months, Bob and I would be working together, working Hurricane Arthur. Like Julio mentioned earlier, they worked together on the VoIP net. Well, we have our internet backbone that we use to communicate. We tied the both centers together and worked beautifully. Thankfully, Arthur wasn't as strong as it could have been. It did brush the Outer Banks of North Carolina that day, and a couple days later went up through Halifax and then the Canadian Maritimes. As a Category 1 hurricane, actually before it got to Nova Scotia, it dropped down to a tropical storm. So we were lucky there. And we've also been active for every landfalling hurricane in the Atlantic Basin since our formation, as well as a number of tropical storms. Reason being, they were either forecast to become a tropical storm prior to landfall, or either was at the request of the forecasters at the National Hurricane Center. And we've also worked a few storms affecting the out in the eastern Pacific as well. Our mission of the Hurricane WatchNet, one, is to disseminate hurricane advisory information. As Julio and others mentioned, in this day and age of fast food, satellite, cable TV, social media, why do we need amateur radio to get weather information out? Well, back in 2005, when Katrina came through my area in central Mississippi, in my location, I'm 150 miles inland. We had winds at about 130 miles per hour. It knocked out our power lines. We were out without power for 2 weeks. The only way I was able to keep up with what was going on locally is I had a battery-powered TV. There's only one problem. In this day and age, analog TVs doesn't exist. We're now HD. I don't know of any battery-powered HD TVs. Even if you could find one, if the stations were still in the air, you're gonna have to have a real good antenna outside to be able to pick it up. Where I'm at, we have about 6 HD TV stations. We just choose not to pay the prices for cable and satellite TV. But in order to pick up those stations, I have to have a amplified antenna system for my TV to be able to pick up stations. Without power, I wouldn't be able to pick up anything. So folks that are in the Caribbean and Central, they make videos, and they're able to, or someone will record them, play them back on their local stations, because that's where they get the information from, is from the United States. Also here to obtain ground truth weather data. Not only do we give out the weather, but we're there to gather that information that you have. The forecasters, like Dr. Nab mentioned earlier, the data you have is vital to what they're doing. I'm sure most of you may operate with Skywarn, with your local Skywarn networks. Yeah, our weather service we got some fantastic satellites up in orbit that can give you a lot of great details of what's going on at the surface. We have Doppler radar, can tell you a lot of what's going on inside that storm. But with the Doppler radar, all your information you're getting is 5 minutes old. A lot of things can happen in that 5-minute window. I've literally seen times where a tornado can spin up and shut down before the Doppler even has time to pick it up. I've got a long story I could tell you, but we don't have time for that today. But having eyes on the ground that can give those forecasters exactly what's going on can help them make better forecasts, or may let them know, this storm is right on track, or else it may be one of those deals where this thing ain't going where we thought it is. It's actually made a turn. It's either strengthening or weakening. Gives them a lot of valuable data. We function as a backup communications link, not only for the hurricane centers, but also the National Weather Service offices along the coastal areas. Just in case, like back in Katrina, when Slidell lost their power, be a backup there to help relay the information of what they need and what the Hurricane Center may need. We also provide backup communications for all the emergency management agencies, emergency operations centers, as well as non-governmental agencies. Also there to relay initial damage assessments. If you're able to, and it's safe for you to do so, all the reports you can get, including damage, can go a long ways as far as letting the forecasters know how strong that storm is. If there's a lot of houses being blown apart, trees being knocked down, or if it's just a power line or two going down. A lot of that helps the forecasters quite a bit. And of course, we provide enhanced situational awareness to, of course, all the EOCs, emergency management agencies, as well as some non-governmental agencies. From time to time, we do have the hurricane hunters from the United States Air Force, as well as the NOAA hunters come on frequency and talk to us. Won't hardly ever hear from them when they're trying to penetrate the eye or coming back out of the storm, but there have been a few occasions they'll just do a comm check with us or let us know what they're going to be doing. Back in 2003, I believe it was, there was one of the NOAA hurricane hunters, Captain Dave, NL7MT was his call sign. He flew the NOAA P-43 aircraft, affectionately known as Miss Piggy. Got a little emblem of Miss Piggy on the side of the plane. NOAA 42, or F-40, the NOAA 42 aircraft is known as Kermit. But anyway, he was coming in, his mission that day was to fly the perimeter of the storm. And all of a sudden he came on there, was talking to me, he said, according to these waves, this thing is done increased, it's gaining in strength. And for long he said, Bobby, tell them I'm having to climb to 10,000. I was flying at 10, I had 5, having to go to 10,000 is just too rough. Who are we and where are we? Well, our membership runs about 40 strong. We cover about 16 states and 6 countries. We have 5 members who are fully bilingual. They are in Mexico, Aruba, Puerto Rico, and we have 2 in the Atlanta, Georgia area. We're always looking for additional trained net control operators. We are looking to get some that are out in the western reaches of the United States as well as throughout the Caribbean, and to help fill in some voids that we have. A lot of our members are ex-military or seasoned Mars operators, so we got some highly skilled net members. Some interesting facts that I've studied over the past few months. Since the Hurricane Watch Net was formed back in 1965, there's been 590 named storms in the Atlantic Basin alone. 311 of those became hurricanes, and 122 made landfall somewhere in the Atlantic Basin. Since 1965, the United States has been hit 66 times by at least a Category 1 or stronger hurricane. 22 of those were Category 3. 2 made landfall as Cat 5, that was Camilla in 69 and Andrew in 1992. What I don't have on the screen is something I looked over the past few days. I thought was some very interesting information. I was curious about the number or average number of major hurricanes to make landfall or even form in the Atlantic, as well as Cat 5s. In the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, we had on average a major hurricane making landfall every 2.5 years. We had a single hurricane that was a Cat 5 every 3.3 years. From 2000 to 2007, we had 8 Category 5 hurricanes. Since 2007, there has not been the first Category 5 hurricane to form anywhere, much less make landfall in the Atlantic Basin. Florida used to get hit on average 1.5 times a year. Florida's not seen a hurricane landfall in 10 years, much less a major hurricane. To say that we're overdue, people, it would be a major understatement. And of course, the last major hurricane was Wilma back in 2005. Why are we so passionate? After everyone that you've seen today and will be coming after me, I guarantee will have a reason for being passionate about what we do. We have either seen firsthand what Mother Nature can do in the form of these hurricanes, where I'm from, and I don't see the hurricanes, but the tornadoes, or else we've actually lived through them, like Julio did with Andrew back in '92. I can't even imagine what going through that system would have been like, so I would not want to have been where you was at, Julio. But we have seen enough of the storms coming through my area, and we want to make sure everybody stays safe. We're here to help prepare you so you can help prepare your families to stay safe. And because we've, at least with the Hurricane Watch Net, we've seen over 50 continuous seasons, a bunch happen. After our last major El Nino, which was 98, 97, we had the strongest, second strongest and deadliest hurricane to make landfall in history, in the Atlantic Basin history. And that was Hurricane Mitch. In October of 98, Mitch grew up to be a very strong Category 5 hurricane just off the coast of Honduras. Thought I had another slide there. Just looking at one slide there, you can tell Mitch is about the same size of Honduras and Nicaragua combined. Thank goodness Mitch did weaken down to a Category 1 before, drifting inland. But when it did, it dropped more than 75 inches of rain on the country of Honduras. 75 inches. The resulting resulting floods and mudslides killed over 11,000 people. Let me say that again. The resulting mudslides and flash floods from that rainfall being dumped on that country killed 11,000 people. That's not including those that are still missing and the 1,000 that died in Nicaragua and Guatemala. We've seen the flooding caused by hurricanes such as Katrina in '05 when the levees broke in New Orleans. And then after being rebuilt, they got tested again by Isaac back in 2012 when the levees failed again, flooded a lot of people out of their homes. We've seen storm surge damage caused by Hurricane Ivan in '04. The eye of the storm made landfall at Gulf Shores, Alabama, but the storm surge was so strong at Pensacola, in Pensacola, the Escambia Bay I-10 bridge got wiped out. If you look in that bottom left-hand corner of your screen, look closely. You're going to see a few of those concrete pylons come out, it should be coming out of water. They're missing. They're totally gone. Water is powerful. The only thing I'm curious, though, in that one photo is why that 18-wheeler was on that bridge during Category 4 hurricane. We've seen the storm surge caused by Superstorm Sandy back in 2012 when it hit New Jersey. It could have been a much worse storm because for years up in New Jersey and New York, mitigators in that area feared a major hurricane hitting that area. At one time, Sandy was a Category 3 hurricane. It did weaken before making landfall, but still, all the water being pushed up from that storm as it moved north and finally made inland caused a lot of damage. And then storm surge and wind gusts combined just literally flattened Gulfport, Mississippi with Katrina back in '05. Some folks may think, well, tropical storms aren't too bad. I tell that to the people of Houston, Texas back in 2001 when Hurricane Allison came aboard, dropped 40 inches of rain. 40 people died in that storm, left 30,000 homeless, and destroyed over 2,800 homes. Downtown Houston was flooded, hospitals and businesses were damaged. In all, Allison caused $5.5 billion in damage. Some people think, well, landfall and hurricanes don't cause much havoc, do they? No, they can cause a lot of havoc. This, of course, was Joaquin last year. Yeah, one of the fastest growing hurricanes I've ever witnessed. It went from a Category 1 to Category 4 hurricane in less than 24 hours while it was slowly moving through the Bahamas. When it was over Cat Island, it was also part of the demise for the cargo ship El Faro, which sunk about 35 miles northeast of Crooked Island, in which all 33 members on board perished. But as Joaquin started moving to the north-northeast, even though it did not make landfall, it was interacting with the frontal boundary moving across the southeast of the United States, sucked a lot of moisture out of it, and dumped it on top of South Carolina, causing massive flooding. So hurricanes or tropical systems, wherever they are, can cause trouble just about wherever you're at. One way to stay informed, besides news media, you can come to our website, hwn.org. Anytime we have an active storm, it'll be on our active storms list by the dead center of the screen. Although our primary interest is that of the Atlantic Basin, we also do keep up for those on the internet for the Eastern Pacific as well as the Central Pacific. In the middle of the screen, you'll see a link that says Tropical Weather Emails. This will be our 17th season offering a free service where you can sign up for the on the Atlantic products in either Spanish or English, as well as the Eastern Pacific and Central Pacific. As soon as, during hurricane season, as soon as if there is an active storm, within just a few moments you'll have a copy of that advisory in your email box. 4 times a day, the Tropical Weather Outlook is issued, and you'll have that as well. Another way to stay informed is, of course, via amateur radio. Before any net activation, we issue all of our reports that we get from the Hurricane Center on the networks of 14300, primarily the Interconnet, Maritime Mobile Service Net, as well as the Pacific Seafarers Net. Hurricane Watch Net generally activates whenever there's a hurricane within 300 miles of landfall or at the request of the National Hurricane Center. And depending upon its forward speed, we may activate outside that 300-mile radius. And also, we may activate for a tropical storm, but that's usually when it's forecast to become a hurricane before landfall. Every net activation I've been a part of on the Hurricane Watch Net, we always hear folks that are checking in with emergency equipment, or they're either running on battery power or using some type of emergency backup antenna. I've heard folks checking in, they're using a dipole antenna up in their attic, and people think, well, you know, really on HF you need to have the best antennas you can outside. And that's true, but not necessarily true. During a hurricane, most people that are in the hurricane-prone areas, they'll usually pull their towers down. If they have crank-up towers, they'll want to pull it down. But to have a good emergency backup antenna is, I would recommend it. You may not have enough room in your attic to put up a 20-meter dipole or feel comfortable doing that, but there's an easy workaround with that. One can take a couple of antenna mirror mounts. You can pick up at your local truck stop for about $8 a piece. They can be assembled together, sort of like this piece here. I'll have it up on the table after our presentations. Only one minor modification you do to it. On the top end, where there's a plastic insulator right below the antenna connector, disassemble that assembly, take the plastic insulator, put it on the bottom. When you reassemble it, and what that ends up doing, it gives you your counterpoise for your dipole. And use either a couple of ham sticks, or if you have the Hustler mobile HF antenna system, makes a real easy dipole. It doesn't take up much room. You can set them in your attic. I've talked to a lot of folks on the Maritime Mobile Service Net using that same setup, and they're probably not no higher than 10 to 15 feet off the ground. I was blown away when they told me what they were using, because they were coming in S5 on me where I was at. So we've had quite a few that do that. A couple of years ago, during Hurricane Gonzalo, when it was getting ready to make landfall on Bermuda, one of our newest net members, John, VP9NI, he was running no more than a 20-meter dipole, 10 feet off the ground. And for his power, he was using a computer UPS, an uninterruptible power supply. He had two of them. He let the first one run down too quickly, running at full power. He took his second one, took the 12-volt battery out of it, detuned his radio down to 12 watts, kept on talking to us. We never missed a beat with him. In fact, he even let us know when Hurricane Gonzalo made landfall on Bermuda. And the thing, that was significant because the forecasters were not expecting it to make landfall. They were expecting the night to go west and around Bermuda. But it actually made landfall, and he gave us those reports. And also, the report he gave us the barometric pressure, which matched and confirmed the Hurricane Hunter's aircraft on barometric pressure. If you want to still try to talk to folks indoors, if you lost power and you don't have a outdoor 2-meter antenna or 440 antenna, something I've used and tried and works very well. You take a 90-degree PL259 to SO239 adapter, then a PL259 to BNC adapter, then a little BNC half-wave telescoping antenna. That's one for 440. Just plug it in the back of your radio, set it to 5 watts, and you're on the air. I've talked on ground wave at least 5 miles or better. As the repeater's on the air, nobody could ever tell what I was running. So they make them like that for 440 and 2 meters. Just a little quick, easy way. I know it's not the best in the world, but there again, it's an emergency antenna. So it's just something to think about there. And in your handouts, I've given some links where you can go and get some information on making some NVIS antennas for after the storm in case your antennas get messed up. In fact, we've got a little kit up here that's real easily made. Doesn't take no more than about the size of a tissue box. Very, very small, compact enough to keep a couple spools of wire in there to throw up a 40-meter dipole. It doesn't take up much room. So very compact, something to think about. When we activate, we issue notices out to the daily users of 14325, as well as 72.68 megahertz. We'd like to always want to thank the daily users of those two frequencies for allowing us to come on and use it for the Hurricane Watch Net. They've been so generous to allow us to have a clean airspace to get on and do our job. And I know those in the affected area appreciate that as well. We also send out information to the International Boat Watch Network. they're able to easily reach well over 2,000 mariners in the Atlantic rapidly. Whether they're hams or not hams, they can at least come on and listen to what the information we have, or if they catch themselves in an emergency situation, we're right there to help out, because during emergencies, we can talk to anybody. We also alert the Waterway Radio and Cruising Club, who operates on daily on 7.268 megahertz. Amateur Radio Relay League, they've been very supportive of us, helping us get email advisories, and also on their website of our activations. And we also alert the Saturn team, Salvation Army Amateur Radio Emergency Team. They usually come on after we close down to take care of health and welfare traffic. And of course, when we are activated, our home frequency of 14325. And of course, now, past number of years, we've been operating 24/7. When we go at nighttime, we drop down on 7.268. We did so because, let's face it, hurricanes don't have they don't know what time of day it is. They're going to make landfall when they get ready to. I always hated it in the past that when it started getting around 8, 9 o'clock at night, 20-meter band starts fading out. We got a hurricane making landfall. I hated leaving people in the dark. It just really bothered me. But now we're operating 24/7, so when the storm comes on, starts threatening an area, we're there till it's no longer a threat. We work together, of course, with the amateur radio station at the National Hurricane Center. That's WX4NHC. It's been a great partnership for us. Before we actually came on the air, or before they came on the air, our only way of getting information was to, back in the early days, we didn't have internet. We just had to get the advisors the best way we could. And then any reports we got, we either phoned in or sent in by fax. But like with your local Skywarn network, by having a radio station at your local weather office, helps that forecaster get that information quicker. And by Neil Frank working with Julio back in 1980 to get that radio station there, oh goodness, that helped the flow of information for everybody so much, and it's been a great team effort. Information we need, of course, when we get ready to activate, those that are in the affected area, we need your location. If you happen to know your latitude and longitude, if you're in an area that may not be easily recognized on a map, that is very helpful to the forecasters. We need to know your wind gust, wind speed, and wind direction. Also, we need to know if your information is either measured or estimated. Estimated will take. However, we do prefer, if at all possible, getting measured data. It's a lot better. If you're not sure how to measure wind speed, you can go to our website, hwn.org. At the top left, top right of the screen, there's a link that says Useful Tools. You'll find a link after that called Beaufort Wind Scale. Get that information out and teach you real easily how to measure wind speed by your surroundings of what's going on outside. Let's talk a moment, though, about personal weather stations. They're becoming more popular now. They're getting to be a lot more affordable than what they used to be over the past number of years. The problem we've seen, though, is a lot of people are not installing them properly, or some think that really high is good, and some think, well, maybe down real low is good. Sometimes your surroundings dictate where you're able to put your station up, or possibly not. The recommended standards just for the temperature sensor is anywhere between 4 to 6 feet above the surface. That does not mean over the surface of an asphalt roof or over the or out in your parking lot. You're going to get a false reading. That heat will radiate. What they're talking about is over grass or over ground. For your anemometer, your wind speed indicator, anywhere between 30 to 33 feet. That may not be feasible in some areas due to homeowners associations. You may have another problem too, maybe some buildings close by that are real tall. That can cause some problems. What am I talking about? Let's take a look at these photographs here. I've seen a lot of people mount their weather station about a foot, maybe 2 feet above the highest point of the gable end of the roof. I can tell you right now, that's the wrong place to put it. Why? There's something known as the Venturi effect. When wind hits a pitched roof, it tries to speed up to get over that roof. Well, as that wind is speeding up, It's giving you a false reading. It's giving you a higher indication on that anemometer than what it really should be. The recommend if you're going to go on a roof like that, go at least 10 feet above the highest point. However, here in Florida, I would recommend grounding that mast that you mentioned, weather station on for lightning protection. This one here, I put it at the apex, but they've got another problem. It's right, got two buildings close by. If the wind is blowing between those two buildings, it's like blowing air through a straw. Air's going to speed up trying to get through it. It's going to create turbulence, come up on that anemometer. It's going to give a false reading, and on top of that, your wind direction will not be right. So that would be wrong. I've seen a lot of folks do this way. Well, let's get it closer to the ground and be a little protected. Well, you got the fence behind you and a building to your left is blocking the wind. Okay, Bobby, what can I do to be a little better? That's a little better example. They've got the temperature gauge at about 5 to 6 feet above the ground. They got the rain gauge and anemometer at about 10 feet. Most of your personal weather stations you can find today, they are generally an all-in-one station. And it's recommended around 6 to 10 feet above the ground and open, with open surroundings to give you would work a lot better. It'd be nice if you get it up higher, but for the anemometer, but it depends on what you're really after. If you want to keep up with what temperature's doing, you want that temperature gauge lower in that 5 to 6 feet range. If you after the wind, of course you want it higher, but 6 to 10 feet for an all-in-one is a good general rule of thumb to do that. So we need your location, wind speed, wind gust, wind direction. Also need to know your barometric pressure. Most of your personal weather stations do measure your barometer. We'd like to get it in either millibars or inches of mercury. Of course, most of your weather stations should give you the information on how to calibrate it. They do need to be calibrated from time to time. If it hasn't been calibrated in the past year, let us know. We'll still take your information, but we'll use it as a reference because it could be off a little bit one way or the other. Also need the rainfall, how much amount of time. Storm surge, if you're close to storm surge areas, if it's safe for you to see what's going on, let us know that, and of course any damage. Predictions for the 2016 hurricane season. That is the big unknown. Dr. Philip Glocksback will be issuing his first initial forecast on April the 14th of this year. But as we all know how back in the season be, it doesn't get any worse than 2005. We had 27 named storms that year. But it only takes one hurricane, like Julio showed you earlier, to make landfall in a year, and that was Andrew. I always tell people when it comes to hurricanes, never let your guard down. What do you mean by that? This is the official track of Hurricane Betsy back in 1965. It looked like after coming out of the Caribbean, it was going to turn north, hit the Carolinas, maybe towards Virginia, maybe turn out and go out to sea, maybe out towards Bermuda. But if you notice, if you look closely, it did a 180. It came back south, went across went through the Bahamas, South Florida, and slammed into southeast Louisiana. 1985, there was a storm named Elena. It came across Cuba, strengthened up, made a 90-degree turn, looked like it was going to go north of Tampa. It made a 180-degree turn, grew from a Cat 2 to Cat 3 hurricane, made landfall in Gulfport, Mississippi. You've always heard the forecasters on TV tell you, do not watch that little thin black line that you see on the screen as far as where the storm is going. It could vary one way or the other. Or it could do like I just showed you with these two storms. It could turn, you drop your guard down, thinking it's safe, and all of a sudden it do a 180, come right back and hit you. Never let your guard down. Bottom line, we're overdue for a normal season. Not just a very active season, but just a normal season. We have a lot of new residents in the coastal areas that have never experienced a hurricane. And of course, we're overdue a major hurricane. And bottom line, please don't drop your guard. That's what this National Hurricane Conference is all about, is helping get people prepared, and we're all about helping save lives. Thank you very much, everyone.
All right, well, we'll thank Bobby for his presentation. And now we will move on to my presentation for the workshop. And I'm going to talk a bit about the VoIP Hurricane Net. And I'm also going to talk about best practices for Skywarn for tropical systems. So, you know, we haven't had a lot of hurricane activity. We have had a lot of tropical systems affect various areas or post-tropical systems that have had significant impact. And in my mind, that is a way of preparing ourselves, because some of these systems have done damage and had impacts that were as big as some of our major hurricanes. I mean, if you tell folks in New Jersey and New York City that Hurricane Sandy was a post-tropical system or a non-major hurricane, they'll look at you funny, right? But by the meteorology, even if you consider that it was a hurricane, its intensity was Category 1. But there were a lot of other factors that made that system strong. We'll talk a little bit about that and how we have to posture ourselves to be ready to provide that critical link of information for situational awareness and how the hurricane nets help. But even if we have a system that is below hurricane strength, how important it is for folks at the local and regional level of their Skywarn programs to be active. So first we'll start with the VoIP Hurricane Net. How many folks have heard of the VoIP Hurricane Net, the Echolink IRLP system? Okay, so about half the room. So as Julio pointed out, we've been working with WX4 NHC since 2004. This reports damage information, weather data, much of which from a United States perspective or a Canadian perspective is like the criteria we would get from a Skywarn or CanWarn program. Same criteria as the type of information that we're looking for. Also provide interoperability between National Weather Service offices in the Hurricane Center, EOCs with their Weather Service offices in the Hurricane Center as needed. We are trying to gather information from folks that may not have their HF license, may not have the ability to have an HF station. It's complementary. It's another way to get the data out. There isn't, our way is right, or it's about getting it whatever way you can through HF on the Hurricane Watch Net, through the VoIP Hurricane Net, with whatever means you have available to get the data first to your local folks and also to the Hurricane Center in a hurricane situation. We provide a liaison to other nets that may be on Echolink and IRLP, so maybe they have a path on IRLP, but they want to keep their net local. We can have somebody monitor that net and relay the information, or they could send a liaison to us. We'll also disseminate the National Hurricane Center advisories and updates. We continue to be on the WX Talk Echolink conference and IRLP Reflector 9219. We have some backup systems. All of this is on our website, voipwx.net. We are also on social media as well. Our activation policy is to activate whenever we have a radio path into the area. And then when we don't have those paths, we look at some other creative ways to get whatever information we can get to WX4NHC. And I'll talk about that because this past year was kind of an example of where we didn't have a lot of radio paths, but we had some other ways to gather some information, send it to WX4NHC that we'll talk about. We will self-activate our net when required if we have a system that is suddenly intensifies to a hurricane unexpectedly. A good example of that was in 2005 with Hurricane Emily. This was a system that was forecast to become a hurricane, looked like it wasn't going to make it. We canceled the activation, looked like it was going to get through the Caribbean islands without intensifying, and then rapidly intensified within 6 hours and became a hurricane, and it was, oh, by the way, after midnight. So talk about a stretch to try to see what we could do to get information, but we were able to get some information from the Caribbean islands, from Grenada, from relays from some of the surrounding islands, who liaison to the Caribbean Emergency Weather Net on 75 meters that provided reports of the damage that was occurring in Grenada, parts of Trinidad, parts of Tobago. And it was a case where we essentially self-activated ourselves to get the information out and into WX4NHC. So just an example of a self-activation that we have done. We have a net management team, a number of us that maintain the net and both our regular prep net that we hold monthly in the non-hurricane season months and weekly during the hurricane season months. We monitor all the different outlooks and discussions. When it gets close to land areas, if it's a hurricane, we look at activating the net and coordinating with Julio and John at WX4NHC, and Bobby is doing the same with them, and we all kind of keep in touch with what our net plans are. I mentioned a system that unexpectedly intensifies, Hurricane Emily. About 6 years ago with Hurricane Tomas, we had a similar situation where we were able to provide information and kind of self-activated our net to provide that information. We have a AOL Instant Messenger chat room that we use on the VoIP Hurricane Net side, and we attempt to prepare our participants ahead of time by involvement in the communications tests that WX4NHC does at the beginning of the hurricane season. We try to also have some training topics on some of our prep nets that we do, as I said, on a monthly basis in the non-hurricane season months. And then, as I said, in the hurricane season, we ramp up to weekly. It's a forum where we just exchange weather data. We'll give comments on everybody's regional weather. Our actual activations run quite a bit differently than the regular net, but it's a way for us to get together, way for our net controls to gather some training and so forth. Our website, again, is voipwx.net. And kind of the philosophy here is we can access a segment of the amateur radio community that we may not be able to access, those that either don't have HF licenses or don't have the capability to put up HF equipment. You know, it's a way to reach out to a lot of these people, those that may not be licensed yet with the permissions and the classes for HF. That's what we're trying to do, from folks that may have, be Echolink PC users, could even be using an app on their cell phone now on Echolink. Those that use IRLP, all radio-based, until it gets into the internet system, it links the radio systems over the internet. You know, it expands who we may be able to talk to at the local level. And all of these disasters and situations we have, they start locally, and then they may expand regionally and so forth, but they start at the local level. So the contact to the local level is really key to providing the information that WX4NHC needs. Technical information, there are a number of ways to configure your nodes and equipment. We certainly can help with that. One of the key things on Echolink is we kick out stations that may have conferencing enabled, and unfortunately in Echolink it's on by default, but it's pretty easy to disable it. It's basically to just prevent unintentional interference that can occur, because someone who connects to you in a conference doesn't necessarily know where your station may be connected to. So it really keeps the interference level down since we have done that. And we have that information on our website as well. For Echolink users that are on repeaters, the main thing is we like to eliminate the repeater IDs and the courtesy tones, and there are ways to do that where it will go out over the radio, but it won't go out over the actual internet system. So there are ways to do that, and we have folks that can talk about how that can be done. Several VoIP net members do have access to D-Star. Myself personally, I'm looking a little bit at the DMR technology as well. Try to cover some of these other modes. There's also the All-Star network, which I know has been active in parts of South Florida, that can also connect into our system. So trying to handle all of these digital voice modes and supporting the Hurricane Center in that area, because, and I totally understand what Julio's talking about. It's not that we don't want to use these modes. I have the same problem running our operations at WX1BOX. We want to be able to get into as many modes as we can. We only have so many operators, so many things that we can monitor at once. So when we have more folks that can help us relay, that helps us out greatly. And again, it's not that we're against one technology or the other. It's just a matter of resources and ability to monitor all these different things. As we prepare for 2016, there'll be the WX4NHC communications test right around the start of hurricane season that we'll be involved in. We are always looking for net controls for our net. If folks are interested, we do have a net control training slide deck that hopefully we will get out there this year. It's been a couple of years since we've run that. We're always looking to recruit contacts within all of the different affected areas. along the U.S. and East and Gulf Coast and internationally. We're always looking to connect with folks. We are also connected up with Bob and the Canadian Hurricane Center and some of the folks there. They have a pretty extensive Echolink and IRLP network up in Canada as well. Also, weather stations. We will monitor the weather stations that are on Weather Underground, APRS, CWAP. You know, there's a lot of data out there, but you got to have people that are able to look at it. So we're kind of a force multiplier in looking at a lot of those systems. And we're always looking to try to make sure we have the resource depth in case we get affected in New England, which has happened a couple times here in the last few years, though not by a direct landfalling hurricane, at least yet. So net activations from last year, we didn't have any formal activations. We just didn't have in a few of the hurricanes that did occur, the radio paths to get to some of these areas. However, we used some other ways to gather information. There's the stormkrib.com storm blogger site. Believe it or not, I've seen some amateur radio operators posting information on that site. We try to intercept that data and get that into the hands of WX4NHC. In Bermuda, I have a contact who I met through stormkrib.com, and she would give us information on what's happening on the island, damage reports, things that she was seeing. She did that again this year with Joaquin. With Hurricane Patricia, there was a weather station on the APRS CWAP in that Camila Cuixmala area of Mexico. It's a very rural area, and I learned yesterday from Dr. Klotzbach's talk that it was a state park reservation area that it hit. So it was a Category 5 that went through the woods. So very lucky that it didn't really hit any populated areas. And then believe it or not, we've already had a hurricane this year. That was Hurricane Alex that impacted the Azores. And there was some question of, is it really a hurricane? But if you looked at the satellite imagery and such, it definitely had those characteristics. But I think where we were lucky is the winds just didn't make it down to the surface as they could have. And there was a amateur radio weather station kind of very near the center of that system that we were monitoring and gathering reports from. The winds never really made it to the hurricane force levels, despite the impressive nature of it on satellite, and I think it did start to weaken as it approached the Azores. In southern New England, where I live in the New Bedford area, we actually have a large Portuguese population, including folks from the Azores, and I was even enlisting in their support if there was damage on the islands, that we could gather that information from those sources. And that's part of what we're really good at. You know, Dr. Knabb emphasized that earlier, our ability to gather this information from areas where they may not have the reach. These are a number of the websites. We'll have this information archived, but you can see about IRLP nodes in your area, how to set up Echolink. You go to our website, voipwx.net. You see we're also on Facebook under VOIPWXNet and on Twitter under VOIPWXNet. And we have a Yahoo group email list as well that folks can join. You know, we're also willing to help assist with folks with some of the technical aspects of Echolink and IRLP for those that have questions. And this is the contact information for a bunch of us on the net management team. Feel free to reach out to us, and all of this information is on our website as well. So that's the talk on the VOIP Hurricane Net. Now I'm going to switch gears to a little bit about best practices in Skywarn for tropical and post-tropical systems. Basically sub-hurricanes, because, you know, and I'll mention here, these are some of the photos we have. You'll see credits to the different groups here in pulling together this presentation, and also some screenshots from the HurAvac tracking program. Hurricanes are definitely one of the most powerful systems. They prompt activations of our hurricane nets, but a lot of times we have weaker tropical systems that our hurricane nets don't typically activate for. Strong tropical storms, post-tropical systems, and one of the things that I've thought about is, well, if our hurricane nets aren't active, are our ham community thinking, well, we're out of the woods, I don't have to worry about it, you know, nothing that we really have to do, I can just kind of move on. Well, these systems can still be kind of dangerous, and they also can prompt a local or regional response, you know, working with your local National Weather Service forecast office or your local emergency management. depending on what the system actually does. So some tropical storms, depending on their size and intensity, can have significant impacts, maybe even impacts that are similar to hurricanes. Many of these tropical systems can interact with other features. You already heard about the South Carolina case, and I'll talk a little bit about that here and some other cases. And then especially we deal with this a lot in the northern latitudes, as Bob pointed out. A system transitioning from tropical to post-tropical can sometimes contain the same threats of a tropical system or worse. These systems get really large, and then they affect a much larger area. So these are some of the things that we want to educate folks on and make sure people are prepared for on the personal level, and then also prepared to support their local and regional agencies, your National Weather Service offices, and so forth. So we'll look at several examples of these systems, and there's many cases that you can cover, and we certainly don't have time to cover them all, but we're going to cover a few aspects. Some cases, the tropical system was sub-hurricane strength, but had impacts where, geez, it seemed like it was a hurricane. Other cases, the tropical system didn't really cause any direct impacts or minimal direct impacts, but they were in the area and interacting with other weather features, cold fronts, other systems, caused a significant impact in an area. And then yet in other cases, you have a tropical system that's transitioning to a post-tropical cyclone, or maybe has characteristics of both, and they become a significant problem for a local or regional area. Tropical storms and depressions and post-tropical systems, they're all the same threats of hurricanes, just maybe at different magnitudes, maybe a more localized significant impact, but still very potent and something that has to be dealt with at a local or regional level. So kind of case study number one is Charleston, South Carolina, the October floods and Hurricane Joaquin. Well, Hurricane Joaquin was well offshore. However, the interaction with the frontal system, as Bobby had pointed out, kind of interacted with this hurricane and brought a lot of the heavy rainfall into the state. You saw these are just a couple of the flooding pictures from the Charleston, South Carolina Weather Office. This was a significant event, and definitely at the local regional level, SkyWarn should be active, reporting in these conditions to their local weather service office, making sure the emergency management agencies have that information for situational awareness for those situations that they don't already know about. So this is one example of a situation where there's not even a tropical storm watch or warning out, but a very significant and historic weather situation took place. Case study number two is Hurricane Arthur. So you see kind of in the top right-hand corner, Arthur is headed towards our friends in the Canadian Maritimes for more of a direct hit. We got a little side swipe of tropical storm force winds and some isolated tree and wire damage on Cape Cod. But the biggest thing about this system was the heavy rainfall. We had a cold front on the day before Arthur, making its closest pass to southern New England, caused a lot of severe weather, severe thunderstorms, wind damage, hail, etc. And that front kind of stuck around as Arthur made the turn and, as I said, scraped the Cape and Islands with some winds. But the interaction between Arthur and the cold front caused very heavy rainfall. 8 inches of rain in my home city of New Bedford, Mass. And the two pictures below, one from Ed Karen, KA1RSY, and one from myself, are some of the flooding pictures out of my very own home city. I can't tell you how many flooded basements there were in the city of New Bedford from this incident. A flash flood emergency was issued for our area because of the amount of flooded streets, flooded basements. There was actually a drone video of the flooding. It was a pretty significant flood event for us. But again, not really a direct impact from a hurricane. Hurricane nets aren't going to be up for it. But at the local regional SkyWarn level, we had to be vigilant, we had to be ready, and we had to be ready to report this information into our local weather service office and other entities. Hurricane Irene. Well, Hurricane Irene weakened to a tropical storm as it approached southern New England. The yellow indicates the wind field of sustained winds of 50 knots or greater in the hurricane force wind gusts that occurred. There were over 1.7 million people without power across the 3 states of southern New England. This was only a tropical storm. okay, a 70-mile-per-hour tropical storm, what's the difference between that and a Category 1 hurricane? Very little, but that's the point. Make significant impacts. The lower left-hand picture is the flooding in Vermont. It's just one of many, many pictures of significant flooding in that state from an amateur radio operator there. And on the lower right-hand corner is the wind damage that occurred on the east side of the system with the large tree down on the car right there in Acushnet, Mass, just outside of New Bedford. Historic impacts. The system's not a hurricane when it affected us. We are still waiting for our first landfalling hurricane since Hurricane Bob in 1991. Sandy. Well, technically, right, by all accounts, people consider this a hurricane, but by the technical nature meteorologically, it was a post-tropical cyclone. There weren't even hurricane warnings up, and obviously there's been a lot of changes now in this because of the nature of these kind of systems. But again, another case of preparedness. While there were no hurricane warnings up, it was about the impacts. There's going to be major storm surge. This system's going into southern New Jersey, and we had hurricane-force wind gusts in southern New England, several hundred miles away. You look at in the graphic up above, the wind field. The blue field is the winds of 34 knots or greater covering, half of the East Coast. And the yellow is the 50-knot wind field, and then the red is the actual hurricane strength winds. Major damage, major storm surge, major wind damage and power outages to the mid-Atlantic, and even up in our area, we had over 400,000 without power in Massachusetts, and the center was down in southern New Jersey. Just a significant system. So again, think about from a preparedness perspective from both yourselves personally and then being able to respond from a Skyward and Aries perspective. One more case from New England, and then I'll have a case closer to home. This was a post-tropical cyclone named Noel. This system was well offshore, but we had winds of hurricane force on Cape Cod and the islands. The Canadian Maritimes suffered significant damage from this system. We had wind gusts to over 50 and 60 miles per hour well in the eastern Mass, with the Cape and Islands having the hurricane force wind gusts, and we had shelter operations for about 36 hours on the Cape and Islands. Again, just another example of a system and not being a hurricane, but kind of originating from being a hurricane, causing significant issues. And then case study number 6, and I was so happy to hear Dr. Knabb mention Debbie, which was just, again, a tropical storm, but caused record rainfall, flash flooding, affected the St. Mary's River, the Suwannee, and Santa Fe rivers with record flooding. Again, a situation of we need to be ready to report in these conditions to our local weather service office. Again, just a tropical storm, significant flooding of urban areas. And in the screenshot are some of the rain totals and records that were broken by Debbie because she sat over the area for a long period of time, causing the heavy rainfall not far from right where we are here in Orlando. So a bit of an education on, we're waiting for that hurricane to come, and it will come, that, as Bobby has pointed out. But we've had systems less than that cause some very significant issues in parts of the country. So again, making sure your home preparedness is there. While a communications emergency may not occur, very important to get this information out from a Skywarn weather spotter perspective. Don't think that the media or social media necessarily has it covered. We are a trusted entity to gather this information. Great for situational awareness and disaster intelligence and kind of being a force multiplier in providing the information. This is something that we've done, very successfully in southern New England. I've heard much of this happening for severe weather and other cases, and it applies, very well with these tropical systems that are below hurricane strength. In our minds, when there's a hurricane, the only difference should be that you're finding that path or liaison to the Hurricane Watch Net or the VoIP Hurricane Net and into WX4NHC to share a lot of this information. That's really the only difference. When you have a tropical storm or some of these other situations that we're talking about at a local and regional level, there's still a lot of information, situational awareness, information from weather stations, the reporting criteria from Skywarn should be shared at the local or regional level. Because all significant weather events and disasters are local, and that's, very important. The other piece is, in kind of closing this out, we are the original form of social media, so we're there when all else fails. Everybody talks about that. But we're also the original form of social media. We're the ones that were providing, and still are providing, the information that, quite a bit of what you see in social media. So we can provide our own social media information and criteria. We can provide a way to manage what's out there in the modern social media outlets, and really provide a solid situational awareness picture for emergency management, for the Weather Service, for media, and any other entities that find the information useful. So that concludes my presentation, and with that now we will go ahead and on to our last presentation before the Q&A. Another gentleman that we've worked with for for the last few years, and representing the ARRL is Emergency Preparedness Assistant Manager Ken Bailey, K1FUG.
Thank you, Rob. Good afternoon, everyone. As Rob said, I'm Ken Bailey, K1FUG, Assistant Manager for Emergency Preparedness at League Headquarters. And I'm pleased to be here today. The main reason being, when I left Connecticut, I flew out ahead of a snowstorm. So I'm happy to be here in sunny Florida. I had to leave my wife back there. She has to contend with taking care of all the snow, which amounted to only about 2 inches. So she's not having a problem with it. Oh, I should add that before I came out here, I developed a cold. And kind of worried me a little bit, because here I'm going to be a speaker and I had lost my voice. I have a little water here to kind of wet my throat a little bit as we go along. So if I start to fade away, you will understand. Now, this presentation is tailored for the new ham operator. And by new ham, I mean someone who's maybe just gotten licensed. Also, a long-time ham who has a lot of experience, but is just now getting into emergency communications. So they want to learn a little bit more about what's involved. So we're going to talk a little bit more about procedures and equipment as we go along. Now, some of you may know a lot of what I'm going to talk about, and I'm actually going to be mentioning a couple of things that you've already heard. We sort of put together our presentations independently, but these are the important things that we believe in that you should all know. Now, obviously, whenever you have a severe weather issue, and we're here to talk about hurricanes, but throughout the country, you have tornadoes. Up in New England during the winter, we get some ice storms, severe snowstorms. We'll lose power. And when that happens, your ability to communicate can be hindered, can be affected. And we're here to talk about what we can do to minimize that. Now, you know that since the beginning of time, we've learned how to communicate. And amateur radio is just one of many ways in which we can communicate. We've been doing it now for well over 100 years when it comes to emergency communications, starting back in the early 1900s, when amateur radio first became involved in reporting, of all things, stolen vehicles. Some of the very first communications involved stolen vehicles that were spotted as they passed through some of these small towns. So since then, we've been reporting a lot of weather-related situations, which we've become known pretty well for today. We have the ability to do this. Excuse me. Yeah. We have the ability to communicate, and we certainly do that often. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about a toolbox, and it could be a physical toolbox, but it's more of a concept. Think of amateur radio as a tool in that toolbox. Everything you know, everything you've learned here before you came here as an amateur radio operator, everything in life, school, can go in that toolbox. It's just an ability to package everything that you know together in one package. And we'll start with training. Local training in your community. So when you joined ARES, you probably asked, or should have asked, what kind of training do I need to have? What kind of training would I receive? And ask for or, take that training and use it as stepping stones to more. Map out a training plan with your local ARES group and take all the training that you can that's available. Now, the ARRL has some training courses, emergency communications training, and you probably know them as EC001, which is the Introduction to Emergency Communications. There is a more advanced course, EC016, which is for leaders in ARES. They'll find this more appropriate for their positions. And of course, there's the PIO training, Public Information Officer training, which is not exactly amateur radio related, but it gives you a good idea of how to communicate with others, with people of the press, because definitely when you are deployed or you're communicating on behalf of your served agency, you're going to be approached by the press or other individuals trying to get some information about what you're doing. And you want to know what you can and cannot say. And as a PIO, you generally learn to refer the questions to the leaders in the served agency that you're working with. The Emergency Communications Training by EMI, the Emergency Management Institute. FEMA provides all these courses that are available. Now, you should all try to take at least the 100, 200, 700, and 800 courses that are available. How many have taken those courses? Okay, great. They're kind of fun to do, and they're free. So why not take advantage of it? There's the Professional Development Series, which are additional courses that you could take, and if you do, they send you a nice certificate that you can hang on your wall. Wallpaper, we all like that. Now here's the Department of Homeland Security, which provides an auxiliary emergency communications course. They oftentimes tie this to Dayton, so if you go out to Dayton, you might find that a course is being offered nearby. And it is also free. It's mostly geared towards the public safety agencies and how amateur radio operators can assist them in times of need. It's a good course. By all means, if you have the opportunity, go for it. The National Weather Service, and through Skywarn, offers quite a few courses also. Now, you heard Rob talk about it, Skywarn. You can get Skywarn training throughout your communities. And depending on how active your Skywarn program is in your community, they may publish the times and dates for the courses that are going to be offered. See if you can fit them into your schedule. They're great. They're not long, maybe 2-3 hours an evening or two. And you'll come away with a lot of information about weather and how you can offer your assistance in reporting severe weather. COMET. and you'll see the link up there. That's a great program. They offer all kinds of courses online. Most of them are geared for the meteorologists, the professionals, but there's a lot of courses also available for students to take of all ages. And if you look through their online catalog, you might find something of interest. Spaceweather.com is a lot of fun. Learning about propagation and what happens when there are many sunspots that are going to affect communications. You want to find out how that is affected. That's a course for someone else, but by all means, take a look at it and see if you can learn a little something about propagation, which we'll cover a little bit more in a little bit. Skywarn spotter training that Rob was talking about. And something that I participated in for a few years is Skywarn Recognition Day. Anybody here do that? Great. If you don't know what it is, briefly, you get together at your local National Weather Service office, and the hams, utilizing VHF, VoIP, they're utilizing high-frequency communications equipment to talk with other Weather Service offices throughout the country. And the numbers amount to about maybe 80 offices or so. They're not always active on the air on Skywarn Recognition Day, but you try to work as many as you can, and you get different levels of participation. So you might, I can't remember all of them, but you might receive a certificate for reaching the tornado level or something of that nature. It's a lot of fun. So it's the first week in December, if I'm not mistaken, weekend in December. A lot of fun. Now, I'm going to digress a little bit. We've been talking about, participation in amateur radio. Safety. I cannot stress that enough. If you're in the hurricane zone, you're in the path of the hurricane, and an evacuation is given, don't hesitate, just leave. Go to your reported shelter, bring your equipment if you can with you, bring some personal equipment that you feel you may need, but by all means, don't try to ride it out if you're in the flood zone, for instance, in the path of that hurricane. Well, that goes for any kind of severe weather conditions. FEMA has published an online course called IS-22. It's all about safety. Are you ready? Are you ready to participate in, for instance, sheltering during severe weather? Are you able to protect your family during this time? So it's an online course. They have publications also that you could take, but I suggest that you take a look at this. It's quite involved. It's quite lengthy, but I think in one of your packets you have an emergency plan. I think that's based on this IS-22. Get over this here. Now, how you prepare for radio communications depends on whether you're in the path of the hurricane or outside of that zone. Remember your IS-22 training when you review it. It gives you a lot of information of what to do. Remember safety. Make sure your family's protected before you deploy yourself and your radio equipment. Also, when you do deploy, you need to consider not only the safety, but radio, your personal equipment, survival gear, for instance. What are you going to bring with you when you do decide you're going to ride out that hurricane. It could be something as simple as a small go kit. This is an example of a VHF, UHF go kit. It's like in a camera bag, something you can put together quite easily. Equipment you have right at home that's easily available. Certainly this is just minimal. You could package this together with as much equipment as you feel necessary. Food, water, etc. Might be included in here. Meds, of course. Whatever you feel you will need for your particular situation. Now, for those new to emergency communications, you're probably going to get set up with VHF, UHF transceivers. Buy the best that you can afford. If you don't know what's good, ask someone. If you're in your ARES group and you're just getting started, ask some of the others about the equipment that they have, what they carry, why they carry that particular one, and get as much detailed information as you can. And there are many inexpensive transceivers today, and they all work very well. And one of the nice things about some inexpensive transceivers is if you drop it in the water, you lose it, it walks away, no big deal. You can just go out and buy another one for maybe $30, $40. If you lose one that you spent $300 for, it's going to hurt a little bit more. So by all means, whatever you can afford, and think about those inexpensive ones, which seem to work pretty well too, although some people may say otherwise. Be active with your on-the-air events, and we'll get into more of this, but your ARES nets, oftentimes they meet weekly, nightly. Don't forget that on the weekends, the marathons, the walkathons, and the parades, the other events that take place. Don't wait until an emergency happens before you test your equipment out at these events. High-frequency communications seems to be what newcomers are not involved with, mainly because of licensing. If you're fairly new and you only have a technician license, you're going to be restricted as to what frequencies that you can operate at. So please consider upgrading licenses. If you're a technician, go for the general. And putting together a high-frequency go kit, as like one pictured here, is fairly easily. Just a power supply and maybe a larger battery, wire antennas for 40 and 20 meters seem to work out pretty well. A simple high-frequency transceiver, fairly small, maybe putting out 50 watts or so, would be more than adequate. And learn how propagation works, because that's going to become pretty important when you're deployed in the field. The value of high-frequency communications in the form of ARES nets, traffic nets, Hurricane Watch Net, and WX4 NAC, which we were very well informed about previously. I cannot overemphasize the need to participate in these nets. This is where most of your training is going to be had. Inside the hurricane zone, you're going to probably need emergency power. I say probably because there have been many opportunities when I've been deployed where we never lost power, but I was always prepared just in case. Remember that generators can be dangerous, so you want to have a very thorough understanding and knowledge of their use and how to set them up, and the fact that especially on high frequencies, they generate a lot of noise, whether they're the simple small generators and or some of the larger commercial ones. There's a YouTube video there that published by the ARRL where the narrator, Bob Allison, has tested out several generators, and he explains a good deal about them in general and how you can reduce the high frequency interference. Solar power is certainly a given, especially when the sun finally comes out, and then there's no commercial power yet, but you can certainly use solar to charge batteries, and that will get you back on the air. Antennas, backup antennas. Now, I've lost 2 Yagis through the years, not to hurricanes, but to ice storms. The ice can really weigh down your aluminum and cause them to snap and break. So backup antennas, wire works extremely well. Ideally, 40 meters and 20 meters are where you want to have backup antennas for. However, you know, other bands like 80 meters and 30 meters certainly is going to come in very handy when you're trying to provide communications. Nothing really, you know, complicated. Just a piece of wire. Make a dipole with a center insulator, and whether you use, you know, a form of twin lead or, you know, balanced cable, coax, anything that you have on hand will probably work. Most of your rigs today can be utilized with a tuner, and you'll get yourself on the air, even with low power. Here's a list of the various links that were talked about today. I just put them up here because I wanted to reemphasize that these are the important areas that you probably want to spend more time thinking about. Now, you don't always lose internet connectivity, but I would always make sure that if you got your computer set up, that you check out and obtain any information that might be available via the internet before you do lose power. And also, you could use your cell phone if you have one as a Wi-Fi hotspot. It's definitely something fairly easy to do, and you could check that out before, you know, an emergency exists where you may absolutely need to have internet connectivity. So if you could practice doing that, you'll be all set. Now, outside the hurricane zone, this is mostly geared towards high-frequency communications. You're away from the area of the hurricane path. You've got some great antennas. You've got some high-frequency radios, maybe with amplifiers. You can be heard. You know you can be heard because you're very active on the air. You've entered contest, which you seem to enjoy, and you check into nets. You rag you with your friends, and you know your equipment because you've been testing it out. Now, here we go again with the Hurricane WatchNet, a formal association with the NHC. We've just heard this. Monitor the Hurricane WatchNet on 14.325 or 7.268 megahertz, and learn how they provide procedures. Excuse me. Thank God for the water. You'll get an idea of what information they're looking for. There was Hurricane Irene that I was actually at League headquarters, and when Irene came ashore, we were feeding information to the Hurricane WatchNet. And I think I might have surprised them momentarily when I called them to say I had information from Connecticut locally, collected information on Irene. And I was signing the call W1AW from League headquarters. It kind of surprised them. They didn't expect to hear from us, I guess. So we had the best of antennas and equipment, and we could hear them and they could hear us. And it worked out very well for us that day. Now, oftentimes you'll hear people say, oh, I'll go out on field day, bring my equipment out in the field, and I will test my equipment out. And that's fine. And you should do that. It's a lot of fun. It really is. But it only comes one weekend a year. If that's the only time you bring your equipment out to test it, you may find that when you actually have to use it, it's just not going to work for you. So if you want to be helpful, the more you know, the more useful you will be. Take advantage of all those online courses, whether it's with the ARRL or through FEMA, or there's a lot of colleges and universities that offer courses, whether they're face-to-face in the classroom or online. They're available. And oftentimes, you'll find that these classes are free. They don't cost you anything, and you might actually enjoy taking some classes going back to school. So get on the air and have some fun, participate in contests, join the nets, communicate. By doing so, you'll test your equipment, you'll learn about propagation, and that's it. There's some contact information for us here. And my apologies about my voice. Thank you.
All right, so thanks, Ken, for that presentation, and that concludes all of the presentations. So what we'd like to do is have the speakers come up here, and we'll take any Q&A from both the audience here and from the live stream. One other thing I'd like to point out, and maybe we can have one of the guys pass these around, is now that we're at the end and we're at the Q&A session, we have a little bit of an evaluation form to tell us how we did today at the workshop. You know, was the content good? Are there things that you'd like to see us cover that we didn't cover today? Give us some ideas so that, you know, when we're back in Orlando, believe it or not, we can already tell you that there'll be a workshop again in Orlando in 2018. We can have that feedback and then adjust the workshop accordingly so we can keep the material fresh and cover some other things that you guys might be interested in. So I'll just have the guys in the front here take one and pass it around and fill it out and give it to us at the end of the session. For those on the live stream, we're going to try to have either this form available online or have an online form for folks that would like to fill it out who are on the live stream. So with that message said on the survey form, any questions from anyone in the group? I don't see anything in the live stream yet. I think we just got one, but let's start in the room. Any questions for folks in the room? Yes, sir.
Well, just a couple of things I wanted to touch on that Ken talked about. First off, regarding field day and the importance of working with your equipment, not just on field day. I can't tell you how many hours I've spent during field days helping people figure out how to use the equipment they bring. It's a good chunk of field day each time, and quite often it's the same people year after year who bring that same piece of equipment each year, and I have to spend time helping them figure out how to use it again. So we can maybe eventually start gaining some points. So I just wanted to speak to that, and that is very important. And I know Ken's point to the presentation to a great extent was for the new users, for the folks who are just getting involved in emergency communications. So that's a very important thing. Know your equipment. It's helpful for field day, and it's really helpful if you have to deploy with that equipment, if you know your equipment. And then the other thing that Ken mentioned was the cheap radios that have been all the rage the last couple of years. And it is sort of an interesting thing, and it's great that it allows people to, at very low cost, get involved and even start getting involved with their local area groups and so on. Well, one thing I wanted to say from the perspective of someone who has often worked as a net controller for some of our big public service events, please work towards getting better quality radios. Yeah, those cheap little radios are great as a secondary radio, as a backup radio, but something we hear at those net control points is quite often the folks running those radios on those big events. Those are the people we often have to ask for fills on information companies. We have to ask them 2 or 3 times because the audio quality often just isn't quite there, and transmitter circuits maybe just aren't quality. And so they're fine for rag chew, and you're getting involved for like in your local net, but in those public safety, or I'm sorry, public service type events, or if you have to actually deploy and use those radios in an Aries activation, that's where the radios from the traditional amateur radio manufacturers, or even some of the commercial type radios that are available out there, really helps for those of us doing net control if you can get that information through the first time.
All right, very good. So thanks for those comments. For those on the live stream, I don't think I could articulate all of them. We don't have a mic to really, that mic is on a wire, so it'd be hard to run it around the room. But it was basically commentary for the folks on the live stream on the importance of using your gear beyond just, taking it out for field day, kind of emphasizing the point that Ken made. Also a bit on the public service event and coordination side of things, and using of equipment in those areas. Basically practicing with your equipment as much as you can before an incident or a key event comes up that you want to make sure that equipment works ahead of time.
Hey, Rob?
Yes.
If I could add to that, for those that don't normally operate HF, especially on HF nets, I would like to suggest that you can get on there, start using that. If you've never used headphones, you would be amazed at what you can pull out just using headphones as opposed to using an external speaker. That external speaker is going to produce some frequencies that you're just not going to want to hear right. It's going the audio that the voice that you're trying to hear will get covered up. So put on using headphones, also adjusting your RF gain. A lot of the newer radios have DSP, where you can adjust the filters, adjust the bandwidth. I have literally on my station that I have, just use an external speaker. There'll be a station, all you hear is white noise. But yet you put those headphones on and adjust your the filtering, and all of a sudden there's a station there just as clear as a bell. The meter's not moving, but you can pull it on out and work with many stations. So if you've never done that before, give it a try. You might like it. You may see a lot of stations that you're missing.
All right, very good. Let's. We have one question on the live stream, and that question is there a brand of weather station that we feel is better than others? So we don't do promos for the different weather station companies, but I'll just make a comment of what I own at home, and it is a Davis wireless weather station. I've had very good luck with it. I've also owned a Peet Brothers weather station, but I've had quite a few issues, honestly, with the Peet Brothers. They had very good customer support. I had some issues, at least on my level, with that, and I've been pretty happy with the Davis weather station. So that's just my experiences. Not saying definitely buy a Davis, just some of my experiences. And Davis is a pretty pricey one, so some of it will depend on your price range, along with the reliability of the unit. Others have comments?
Same as A lot of meteorologists have their own weather stations at home, and I've heard good things about both the ones that Rob mentioned, but most of our forecasters who do have some at home, they have the Vantage Pro from Davis. So that's what they use. Again, a little pricey, but it's a good weather station.
All right. Oh, question in the back.
Just a quick question to clarify. So Bobby mentioned 2 storms in the U.S. in the last, so what was, he said Category 5. What was Katrina? I'm curious. Was that Category 5?
Katrina made landfall as a Category 3. At its peak, it was a Category 5 at 160 miles per hour, but it made landfall as a Category 3.
All right. There was another question over here. Oh, on the live stream? So the question on the live stream, is there a role for those of us who live inland hundreds of miles away?
Yes.
And I think the answer to that is absolutely. I mean, one of the things, I think for both the VoIP net, the Hurricane Watch net, having net controls in other locations is critical, especially in areas that aren't being affected by the tropical system. So, I think that's very important. Bobby, you probably want to add more to that.
Oh, yeah. One slide I left out of my presentation for the sake of time. A good example of being inland with a hurricane affecting land. Go back to 1989 when we had Hurricane Hugo hit Charleston, South Carolina. That storm hit as a Category 4 hurricane. When it crossed over into North Carolina at the Smoky Mountains, it was still a Category 1 hurricane. It finally weakened down to a tropical storm, stayed a tropical storm up along the Ohio-Pennsylvania state line, and then finally weakened into a non-tropical low as it went into the Great Lakes and on up into Canada. So all those regions in that path of that storm received flooding, damage. Yeah. Even if you're in the middle of the United States, you can still be affected by these storms. So your reports along the way goes a long ways in helping out.
All right, and we have another question from the live stream. During a landfalling hurricane, I've heard forecasters mention high tide plus a full moon. What is the aspect of the moon significance? And that is that the moon is going to add more to the tide. When you have a full moon, you're going to have a higher tide cycle astronomically. So that's part of it. And Bob, I don't know if you want to add a little more to that, but that's that is one of the items.
No, exactly that. When you have a full moon, you have your highest tides of the month. It's not necessarily right. The highest tides don't necessarily come at the same time, same day as a full moon. It could be a day or so after. But when we have a storm producing a storm surge, couple the storm surge onto the high tide, and that's where you get your highest water level at the coastline and the deepest penetration of water inland. So if you have both things happening at the same time, very dangerous situation.
Yes, question in the back.
Yeah, is FLDigi used by any of the organizations here? It's a digital program?
Yeah, no, I'm familiar with FLDigi. It's something we haven't gotten to yet, at least, and I've used it a little bit in Eastern Massachusetts. Our Cape Cod Aries group has been very active with FLDigi, and there's a lot of interesting things with it. I do have a signal link at the Weather Service that we just haven't had a chance to install and utilize at the local level. In terms of the hurricane piece, I'll hand it off to the other guys to answer that. I know, Julio, I don't know if it's part of the narrowband emergency messaging system. I don't know if you guys have used that at all.
No, we haven't had FLDigi yet. We do use a SARS net, which is a UHF net interconnecting a lot of the EOCs all the way from Jacksonville, Tallahassee, all the way down to Miami. And we do practice that. We have a net every Friday morning that we do some testing on.
All right, any other questions from the group or on the live stream?
I have a question.
Yes.
Referencing Echolink versus IRLP, as a quick overview, because I haven't had a chance to look at either one. And it sounds like that's kind of your field. What would you say about each one of them and the aspects?
Yeah, so I think they're very similar. Nowadays, a lot of the nodes that are out there can kind of do both, in that it can either be connected in as Echolink or connected in as IRLP. It can't do both at the same time. There's conferences that allow you to have stations of both connected, but the nodes themselves, they can kind of be made to do either or. You can either connect in on Echolink or you can connect in on IRLP. And the main difference is that IRLP is purely radio linking over the internet. You basically have two radio systems, whether they're two radios on simplex or two repeaters that are using the internet to get connected together. Echolink can do the same thing, but there's also a way to access it just through your PC. You can have your call sign validated. They do check the FCC database. They've beefed this up quite a bit in the last few years, and you can actually connect up via your PC. You can actually even connect up through your cell phone with an Echolink app. You do need to have an amateur radio license to use Echolink if there's any non-amateurs in the room, but it's another way to link up to different repeaters and systems, and it can be very helpful. We had a winter storm yesterday in Massachusetts, and I was actually using Echolink on my PC from Florida to listen in and check in and help with some of the nets with our local office, with some of the ham operators that were at the office. So it provides that kind of flexibility. Certainly not a be-all, end-all, certainly not last-mile communications, but definitely another means of communication, and very similar, except Echolink has that additional aspect of being able to connect up directly from your PC or with a cell phone app. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much, guys. What we're going to do now is we're going to get ready for the raffle, but we're going to do a sign-off to our live stream participants. So I want to thank everyone on the live stream for participating, and thank everyone here physically for being at the workshop today. For the folks in the room, stick around for the door prize raffle that we will do. And for the live stream folks, thank you so much for being online with us today for the workshop. We hope you find it informative. We'll get that survey form posted up one way or the other here in the next few days. And we'll say goodbye to our live stream folks, and hopefully this was helpful for hurricane preparedness. And for the guys in the room, thank you so much for attending, but stick around for the door prizes and the raffle. Thank you.